Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this marvelous Sunday evening. Wow. And we've got Dr. Brucato in the house. Does it get any better than Dr. Gary Brucato, anybody? Man, oh man.
Yeah, Chris.
I love you, Gary. Look, we are so excited. We've got 2024 just almost at the end here. 2025 around the corner. Yes, it's going to be a rockin' new year, folks. Everybody is going to have so much fun in 2025. It's going to be a great year for everyone, our friends, our family, members here on TIR. We love you all, and we're grateful, and we pray that you had a wonderful Christmas, an amazing Hanukkah, and any other religious celebration you may have celebrated as a family. We hope that the universe was on schedule for you and that God shed his grace upon you. And it was an amazing experience to hopefully hang out with your families. We sure do appreciate you. And I want to thank our mods going into the new year here. Miss Sophia, Teresa M., Maui Girl, Mimi J2, and Laura. And we're so grateful that the Lord blessed Miss Sophia with better health to come back for us. And then, of course, with Teresa and her husband, Jeff, he's going through some health issues. We're praying for him and that 2025 he knocks it out of the park. And good positive vibes coming his way. So, that said, Dr. Brucato, if Gary, it's great to have you again. And folks, if you have not run to that bookstore yet to buy his new book, and he's got another one coming, by the way, I'll just give you a heads up. He's actually got a couple in the pipeline. But if you've not bought The New Evil, Understanding the Emergence of Modern Violent Crime, let's push this to #1 before New Year's Day. Okay? You guys did it with this book recently, and now we've got to push Gary back up above Craig, and we'll start a little rivalry here before those two.
We love each other too much. We wouldn't care. Each of us would cede it to the other if we could. Cede the #1 spot to the other. But you know, Chris. Oh, somebody's ringing my doorbell. I'll be right back.
Go back to your door. Run to your doorbell. And while Gary's doing that, if you're new to our channel, we only ask one thing on this channel, and that's if you could hit that subscribe button and that thumb. That helps with the algorithm, and it helps us to do what we do here. And we're grateful that you are here. If it's your first time here, I'm going to brag on this with Dr. Brucato. Look at, he ordered Chinese. How
it's my
in Manhattan. Dr. Brucato is very humble, but at the same time, he's world renowned. Has the largest database of mass murder anywhere over 119 or 160 years.
119 years. It's got
119 years of data. And every time I turn around and mention a case that I was involved in, he looks it up on his sheet and he goes, oh, yeah. And he just, again, he blows you out of the water. But tonight, we're gonna take another shot at just talking about where the defense could go with this latest information in relationship to Bryan Kohberger allegedly being the suspect in the Idaho 4. And of course, he's innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. That's the way our system works. But go ahead, Gary.
I was just going to say before we launch into that, I did want to say two things, if it's okay, very quickly.
Of course.
I wanted to thank your audience because I had an excellent response to the show I did on Peacock on Richard Ramirez. I with Johnny Johnson, also from the Cold Case Foundation. We were the psychologists that were analyzing the tapes that have emerged from Ramirez, dozens and dozens of hours of recordings of him. So I thought that, it was really great. A lot of people from your audience wrote to me, told me that they had made a point to watch it because they heard about it. So I really want to thank them. And the other thing I wanted to say was that in the, in the Department of Justice, that eventually, justice does come for things. I did want to say that a case I've spoken about, previously because it horrified me so much, and that I happen to be writing about for the new book that I'm doing, the New Evil follow-up, came to a very happy conclusion a couple of days ago, which, Chris, I was talking about too early, the Zulak case, which I predict, I won't get into the details, they're horrendous. But I really, for those who follow the case, that it was, the short, not so detailed version was that it was a couple, a married couple that were activists in the LGBTQ community that had been considered upstanding citizens in that area. And they were known for having adopted special needs children. And it turned out that they were actually running a house of horrors and a prostitution ring for those special needs children, filming them and doing God knows what. And so it's a really good example of like people that really look like you could trust them and that are kind, that are doing evil. And it came to a successful close with conviction. And I'm writing about it, so you could. But I think it's a case you're going to start to hear a lot about because I'm hearing buzz about it from the news stations, and I'm glad attention's being drawn to it. So, Chris, I think you'd agree that's a nice to end the year with justice, at least in that way, on that horrendous. As someone who worked in those kinds of offenses, you know how awful these cases are, so
they are the worst.
I heard the judge say something like, "I'm happy you're going to spend the rest of your lives and die in jail," something like that. And I've never heard a judge say that.
Yeah, no, it's when they go out that far. When a judge goes out that far, then they've hit some nerves, not only in a social way, but obviously culturally too. So. Hey,
no, it was mixed up. But anyway, so I just wanted to, because I think people sometimes lose that hope.
Well, and one of the things I want to remind everybody, Gary, is let's go over if those of you, again, if you're new with us tonight, we want to welcome you. But I want to get into this idea. A long time ago, when this case first went down,
the Kohberger.
The Kohberger case, yeah. And with our 4 victims, Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. Mm-hmm. And just so everybody else also knows, this is a victim-focused podcast / YouTube channel. So we want to be respectful to them first. But before Bryan Kohberger was even in the ether, we talked about him from a psychological point. And if you get a chance, everybody, I'll put it down on the link again. But go watch Dr. Brucato's first impression of who this individual would be. And he nailed him. I mean, it was like, here it comes. And so that's why I want him on tonight to talk about what's this other situation that was investigated a year before? Is it in the, and I'm going to come at it from obviously a law enforcement perspective / how do I think it's going to play out in court? But I want to refresh everybody's memory, Gary, if you wouldn't mind, kind of give us an assessment one more time about what you saw coming before it got here.
Oh, I see. You mean when we did the show with Ann and Greg and Dean?
Right. Yep.
Well, it's important to remember that at that time, we had absolutely nothing to go on except that there was a quadruple fatal stabbing, that had taken place in this residence. The first clue for me was that this was a mass murder, which is one of my areas of focus as a researcher and as an expert. No matter what definition you use, whether you use the conservative 4 victim at the same time, same place definition that Anne would use in the crime classification manual, or if you use the less conservative 3 victim or more definition, I use that definition myself. It was a mass murder. And what I can tell you from the Columbia Mass Murder Database that I did with Dr. Raghi Gurgis and our colleagues at Columbia, we were the creators, the two of us. We knew that the weapon was very key in terms of what was going on, in terms of statistics. And we had an enormous data set, and you could really trust our stats, And what we knew was that when guns are involved in a mass murder, or what might be called a mass shooting, colloquially, you have a lower probability of the person who committed the offense having serious mental illness. In other words, the kind that would lead to losing contact with reality, disorganization, hallucinating, etc. But when people use things other than guns, probably for a few reasons, you're more likely to actually be disturbed, to have authentic disturbance. And so at the time, what I said was one of two things is going on, if not both. One possibility is that this is a person who's going to be odd, interpersonally peculiar, a person who people are going to find explosive, paranoid, weird, socially isolated, etc. So immediately I thought, this is a male, based on statistics, right? This is male, and they're going to be socially isolated, peculiar, and therefore they did this alone. Any theory in which there was cooperation between multiple males or multiple people was already, in my mind, ridiculous. And I said that there was no overt sexual component to the crime, but that people who happen to choose knives, there tends to be, these tend to be people that are leveling the playing field in some way about social isolation or rejection. There's an intimacy to that weapon. It's very gory and very hostile and so forth. So then I started to say that it's a reason that this is an individual who was operating much more like a serial killer than a mass murderer. So I suggested that they probably had studied crime, which we know if Kohberger is guilty, he did. He would have studied crime, and that the person would probably have been motivated in the way that a person like that was. So that we had to think about some kind of interpersonal grudge, interpersonal isolation, anger, things like that. And then I said, if he is a serial killer, what kind of serial killer is he? Well, probably he's never done it before. This was the fledgling, I would guess, which I think is true, if he was guilty. And I said that a couple things. First of all, that if he was a serial killer, like, from having done the new evil, it would probably be in that category 16 level, right, where you're not overtly sexual. You're killing in that way to express ego and domination and control without a sexual component. And people of that type, who include the Zodiac Killer, Ted Kaczynski, Son of Sam, they tend to have in common that they insert themselves into the press and contact law enforcement because they like the attention. They don't like things being wrong with the story in the public's eye because they want the praise. They want to be famous. They're well aware of that. They want to go down in the annals of crime. And so that was a prediction I made about him, which I think may be true. But anyway,
Okay, staying on that track for a moment.
Yeah.
Now that Bryan Kohberger has been arrested, he's been charged.
Right.
He's allegedly the guy, and again, just for reiteration, he's innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. That's where he's at right now.
Right.
So I want to take it to the next step now, because you pretty much said, okay, this is the kind of guy we're going to be looking for. Now, from what you've seen, only just from your observation, obviously you haven't had a chance to clinically sit down with him or anything like that, but
publicly available information,
right? Public information, just open source information, like everything else. However, I want to know, and I think our audience wants to, dig into your brain a little bit here. How do you think how is he behaving behind the scenes, you think, with all of the court scenarios going on here? Do you have any opinion on that?
Well, it's a little complicated because obviously this is all just conjecture based on this is the person. If he is the person who behaved in the way that we're profiling, then my sense is that if ego is indeed at the center, which is one of the things I think that would have motivated this. There are a few theories I have, but what a person like that would do is you would imagine they would have an extremely high need for narcissistic validation and for control. This is the kind of person who would think very much like a scientist, right? What is the independent variable that if I manipulate it will make people think I'm better than them or great, right? Do I have to be attractive? Do I need to be thin? Do I need to loosen up? Do I need to, be the smartest one in the room? Do I need to, whatever? And of course, when nothing works, then you give in, right? And this is a person who would have intensely studied people, criminals, people of interest, almost like a microbe in a petri dish. I always thought, for example, that the alibi of, gazing at the stars was almost like a Rorschach answer, because it's what a person would say who was thinking of a human being like a distant star that they were analyzing, like an astronomer would, right? I'm far away from you, and you are the thing above me that I can never reach or have, but I know everything about you, right? Astronomers are never going to visit a star or touch it. They would explode or burn if they did, but they know everything about it, right? It's like it's sort of fascinating when you think about it that way. And I think that's a little insight into exactly the kind of guy I think this would have been. So if that's true, what you'd picture is that behind bars while waiting, even though there's, fear for one's, life and freedom or whatever, there would also be, I think, this kind of enjoyment of all the attention, particularly the hybristophilic fascination from women that are interested in him, the idea of going down in infamy, etc. So I predict that if this guy is guilty, eventually he will talk, partly because it will bother him that the story will be imperfect, that's been reported. I mean, I could just picture him, for example, reading the Blum book and aching to correct it. Right? This is what was wrong about it, you fool, that kind of thing.
Would it surprise you if he ever read your materials?
Not one bit. No, it wouldn't. And I say that because if he was, now how do I say this? You and I are both very close with Dr. Ramslin, who is a member of our foundation. We think the world of her. She happened by coincidence to have been his teacher. Well, the reality is that if he was preoccupied with her as the teacher, he might very well have known that she had reviewed my book, had been writing about it, would have talked about it. Whatever. I teach the book to students in our class. Sometimes I do guest lectures. So what I'm saying is I wouldn't be surprised if he had heard about it, and I think he would have studied it. The reality being that if he were reading about Category 16, he sure seems to have used some of the little tricks that those offenders did in that category. And if he was reading it, he was 100% right about where he would be placed if he's guilty, right in that category. So I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he had read things like Dr. Ramsland's books, books about other offenders of note in the criminology world, probably John Douglas books, things like that. Absolutely.
And,
wouldn't you think so?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, every cop reads your stuff with, Gabert and Vernon and others. I mean, just, the top of the crop right there. And, but here's where I'm going with this. All right. With all of the other scenarios, that are floating around in the ether out there in the public, et cetera. Is it bothering him that other people potentially could be getting credit for, the DNA, in my opinion, okay, that the defense and Taylor is going to attack, the credibility of the DNA in relationship to how it was collected, how it was processed, and then, how they got the IgG, et cetera. Okay, that's defense 101, and she's going to do a great job with that, I'm sure of it. However, you still have a gazillion zeros at the end of the DNA on the snap, and it points directly to, Bryan, if he is, or if he's the suspect, then he's got to explain how his DNA got in that house. So that's a really high bar to come over. Does it bother him that social media, for an example, we got almost 2,000 people in here already right now, by the way. So we have a little arena of Dr. Brucato's lecture once again. The thought process is, do you think it's bothering him, or do you think he's just relishing into this idea of I'm still in control? What's your feeling?
Well, I think that, first of all, again, we don't have any idea. This is all just speculation, and this is if he's guilty, because we have to, preserve a person's right to a trial, right, before we condemn them.
Right.
But I think that if he is guilty, as I was saying, is that because of the dual need for ego fulfillment and control that I think are glimpsed in what went on here, what you would expect is a combination of, number one, enjoying the adulation and wanting to be famous, essentially, because of this. But secondly, being annoyed that they can't control everything because it would be incriminating. So having to sit there and hear the insults. In fact, in the Zodiac case, Zodiac, who would fall into the same category, that ego-driven, not overtly sexual kind of person with some kind of anger or grudge, who's dominating and controlling the whole public, all the time. The interesting thing about Zodiac is that psychologists figured that out about him. And one of the techniques they did to provoke Zodiac was they put out information about him intentionally that was supposed to be a profile that was fake. So they said, we believe that, the Zodiac is attracted to same-sex individuals and things like that, just to see if it would infuriate him and get him to correct the record. You see that technique used in the movie Red Dragon, when they go to the guy who's sort of the John Douglas figure, goes to the man who writes for a paper called The Tattler, and they put out a fake profile to provoke the Tooth Fairy, a serial killer. Of course, it provokes him so much that he kills the reporter and records it. But the idea is that provocation for the purpose of infuriating a control freak is a technique that is used, and I'm sure that is used and recommended sometimes as a way of irritating these people. So I think that that would bother him, and if he is guilty, what you're going to see is wanting people to sit at his foot and kind of hear, the same way that he would read about people. Because you've got to picture a guy that would have been sitting in classes at DeSales and in Washington, listening about offenders and thinking, I could have done that better.
Well, and then he writes his survey.
Right. I could have done that smarter. And then, of course, experiences it firsthand, right? The very thing that he was interested in. So, so that's the other thing when you're thinking about possible motivation, is that whole idea of the scientist figure who says, I've got to try this to really understand it, right? So that in addition to all the misogynistic rage and the, grudge and whatever, you think about a person who's so interpersonally odd and so curious about the experiences of other people, almost like I said, like an amoeba in a petri dish, a microbe, that they have to try it, right? Like the famous scientist who created a pain scale for what it feels like when an insect bites you. And he figured the only way to create the scale was to actually be stung by all these things. And he allowed himself to be stung by things that caused blinding pain so that he could phenomenologically understand it, right? Or Sherlock Holmes purposely taking toxins and things to see what would happen, right? So I think there's a little of that going on too that is a little disturbing, because you have a guy who's trying to understand this through other offenders and then goes in and does it, right? So we have to picture also somebody who might be remembering and relishing those things.
Interesting.
So saying, oh, I'm innocent, whatever, and then privately being able to picture everything, that had happened. And think about the power that gives you. I mean, imagine, I think a lot of the things that went on in this case, they were so manipulative and so clever, you almost wonder if he thought of them.
Well, what's going to be interesting is I think we're only hearing, obviously, in the public, the scratch. It's like the old 33 album spinning, and we keep hearing the scratch of, the consistent, over and over play. And we have no idea what the blood evidence that they found, even at his apartment. I mean, they have two sources of blood that
That's right.
they're not going to drop that till the trial. If it's the victim's blood, he's done. If it's the victim's blood, because now they have his DNA in the house, and they have blood at his, apartment there at WSU when they did the search warrant. And I think we need to remember that as the public, that, if that's the case, then a lot of this other stuff, we're feeding him as a public entity by cheering him on in terms of these other things, if he's the guy. But
exactly.
Huh?
No, yeah, right. I appreciate that we keep making that point, because I think, you never want to be, you always want to give people a fair, right to a fair trial. I think it's very important. But
absolutely.
But I think you'd also agree that if we are right, and let's be clear that between Greg Cooper, former head of BSU, right? I mean, right. Head of the Cold Case Foundation, Dean Jackson, you, me, and we have hundreds of years of experience combined, right, in law enforcement. I mean, is it hundreds? Probably. I mean, it's certainly, well, it's in the 3 digits, right? Experience, right? Yeah, a couple of weekends, right? And our collective sense was that everything about this suggested a person who was inclined towards serial killing, and consequently, there were going to be fantasy-oriented elements. There was going to be some kind of surveying of people before probably entering into that house or other houses, other offenses that built up to it, like more petty things. But, sort of like practice runs. But I think one of the things that I predict, and I think you would agree with me, is that when the facts come out about what really went on in that house, that this is not somebody where you're just going to see stabbing and leaving. You're going to see some expression of the need to humiliate and live out fantasy with these people that almost certainly is held back because it's disturbing and being held. But I think you'd agree that because otherwise we can't understand, the public wouldn't understand why the person would do this. And we know that there's always something, right? BTK breaks in. There are very specific knots. There's very particular victims that are more focused on than others for sexual reasons, etc. In other words, there's always a reason, right? And there are things that become so unique to the individual that they constitute signatures. Yeah, right. that they constitute signatures, right? And maybe that's a term we should define for the audience. But
Yeah.
you want to define signature, because I think there would have been something signature about this. Wouldn't you agree that we don't know about?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a signature is a little bit more than an MO. It's the extra added feature to a crime scene.
Right. That's like a calling card.
It's a calling card. Yeah.
Right. You basically,
that's the Reader's Digest version of it.
Yeah. It basically, that's exactly it. I think the idea that it's needed by the person for psychosexual reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the need for the signature is stupid because it gets the person caught, but they can't help it. You know, like the killer who must use a black stocking to strangle the victim every time. You know, the killer who must humiliate the victim, you know, in some way. I mean, classic examples of signature. Charles Albright, who murdered prostitutes but felt an obsessional need to take the eyes. Signature. That's how they were able to link them, because of that missing element of the face.
Well, we have it all over the place with Heuermann in New York.
Right, exactly.
You're a pizza guy. And for the audience, if you didn't know, Dr. Brucato, his practice is out of Manhattan in New York. And of course, you know, Rex Heuermann left his pizza box right near Gary. Gary sent me a text message one day. He sends me this picture, and he's doing like this, pointing at, you know, looking at the trash can, and it's where Heuermann threw his pizza. And I was like, you know, only you.
They up the street and up the block. I know that's like a landmark now, right? The trash can where they arrest. I know. It's hard.
Yeah. So
and John Ray is just a couple blocks up, you know. So
yeah, and so anyway, I thought it was hysterical, but okay, so here's the next place I want to.
We agree, Chris, that there's going to be, when the details come out, we would expect fantasy having been played out, right? And that there would have been, because these guys, it's always about humiliation, domination, control, right? And power, manipulation, that kind of thing. And that part of the reason people are confused about the why is probably that there are details that we don't know yet.
Well, and I think the public needs to be aware, obviously, of the three types of behavior, you know, verbal, nonverbal, and sexual. Right. And thoughts, feelings, and emotions create behavior. And to your point, Dr. Brucato, I think there's going to be stuff that the public is going to go, what? And you and I are going to sit back and go, yeah, well, that doesn't surprise us where that's going to go.
Right.
You know, we'll see what happens there.
But so far, the clues we have of fantasy are vague, right? I mean, we don't know. It could have just been that the fantasy had something to do with murder, but we need to know the inner world. And that's where I think you'd agree, from an investigative perspective, the most interesting things are going to be objects that were found in his possession that might have been trophies, like the rubber glove with the ID thing. I'd really like to get to the bottom of that. What he might have been reading, right? You know, reading materials were taken at the time of the warrant, right? I would certainly like to see his pornography, if he was viewing anything, and what would have been saved on the computer. You certainly would want to see if there were photographs taken on a cell phone, you know, or anything like that to record the event or fantasize about it later. Drawings, plans. And the other thing is, I think you would agree from experience, is that sometimes these guys, the fantasy gets so powerful that it slips out in weird ways. It slips out in what you're writing for school. It slips out in comments you make to people. One of the suspects in the Zodiac case claimed that he went on a hunting trip with the suspect, and the suspect was wearing a Zodiac watch that had that symbol on it, you know, whatever, and said to him, you know what I'd like to do one day? Hunt people. You know, it's like sometimes and, you know, alcohol might have been involved in that story, that sometimes there's a slipping up too, you know, that kind of thing. So I'd like to interview people that knew him to find out if sometimes he exhibited fantasies. Simple example. I saw a photo online. I've never validated if it was true. Maybe the audience knows. That Kohberger seemed very interested in attending a lecture or lectures by Margaret Atwood, the writer of The Handmaid's Tale. And I'm very interested to know if he was intrigued by that story, because it's about the subjugation of women.
Isn't there a photograph of him at that lecture?
But of course, you never know with deep fakes and whatever.
Sure,
I'd like to know.
sure.
But the reason it's important is, remember the story about the woman he went on the date with, and he said to her she had great birthing hips.
Yeah.
Right, and weirds her out. So I'm very interested to know if the subjugation of women, the control of women, is a theme that, from a fantasy level, had a lot to do, and we also know there were complaints about him as the TA, about how he was with women relative to men. So I'm interested to know if that figured into the fantasy, right? So that's all going to, and then there are things that could have been done at the scene that I don't want to get into, but sometimes really horrendous things that can be done to victims that can be expressions of fantasy, particularly when one is overcompensating for inadequacy or wants to make it perfect or leave their mark. And so we'll get to the bottom of that. But I think you'd agree that trial is going to be chock full of things that are going to blow our minds.
One of the things that has always stuck with me, and from the day I walked behind that house up there at 1122, right, when I saw all of these cars, for an example, right, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 cars there, so that I was trying to put myself in the shoes of the offender, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, if this guy came up that road and he passed all of the, we now know, even, all the cameras, the ring camera, the light bulb camera, that we haven't even seen that video yet. We know at this apartment right here to the right of 1122, they also have sound and camera. And they have, this is the house that heard all of the moaning, the dog barking, etc. And they have all of that. Okay, the PD has all of this information, and then we take
the house,
right, and so I was trying to think to myself, okay, well, this guy is whoever this perpetrator is, and right now, he's been alleged to be the guy.
Mm-hmm.
If he's coming up into this crime scene, he's got a window of time to do it. But at the same time, he also knows that there are at least 4 or 5 cars here in this in this building. And when you go to that crime scene and you stand there, and by the way, yesterday was the anniversary of them, the 28th of them knocking this house down. It's been 1 year, if you can believe that, Gary.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. I didn't think of that.
Yeah, yesterday was the anniversary of when they knocked it down. But if you think about, the mindset of this guy based on what your thought process was, of him going into this environment and saying to himself, okay, I've got 4 here. And remember knowing that the rumor or the reputation of this apartment complex is, it's a party house, right? And that's not a crime. The death penalty is not a crime to be living on on going to school in university and having a party house. That's not the death penalty. But if this perpetrator knows that, and he's done his homework, and he's looking at this party house that morning, 4 a.m., and he sees all these cars out there. I mean, this guy is in full dial, I would think. What I mean by that is he is wound up and he's ready to go to work. Okay? Ready to go to work. And I think, the more we think about this now, even, okay, when we look at some of these photographs, they were outside, they were taking these tire tracks. Remember, they said he parked out front. This gives you an example of blood spatter.
I hate
yeah, and it's going to be a mess by the time everybody gets in there. And then all of a sudden, there's this other thought process that comes in, and this is something to consider. I put this slide up probably about a year ago. It says, rest assured now that the house at 1122 King Road, once they tore it down, has come down. It becomes a fantasy come true for the killer. The final moments and memories are locked in the killer's mind as a trophy, knowing the horrors that were inflicted.
Mm-hmm.
The killer decided who lived and who died, and now can add another chapter. The killer is the only one that has the sights and the sounds locked away from the world and controlled in their memory. Yeah. Today, no one will really ever know. It will belong to them, i.e. the killer, forever. Actual complete evil. Complete evil. Gary, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a point that you and I made on the show that I hadn't heard anybody else talk about, but I think it's because when you actually deal with and study offenders, you start to get this stuff, that this is how certain types of people think. And the idea is, it's sort of like to bring it to some place where I think a person on the street would get it, right? It's because they're not in there talking to these kind of guys, is that imagine a person that you share an intimacy with, you share a bed, you're married, or you're in a relationship, whatever. And then that person isn't going to be yours anymore. They're going to share an intimacy with someone else. You might develop such a jealousy, such a horror that intimacy is going to be shared with another person that you might even want to kill the individual that you had the relationship with, so that they can't share that with anyone else. It's like a violation of the privacy, the fantasy world you had, the intimacy of the... That's how you have to think to understand a person that has played out a psychosexual fantasy and doesn't like the idea that that place and the people in it in their mind is theirs. And there's an invasion of that intimacy. And what happens is that if you knock the house down, now they can say, oh, goody, mine forever and no one else's. Only I saw it. Only I understand it. Only I was there. Only I was. So that you now have this, you're giving that to the individual. And that's why I think, even from a psychological perspective, tearing it down seemed to me to be consistent with a desire for control and domination that an individual would experience like that. And so it disgusted me on a level that it was very difficult for me to explain. And then, of course, the symbolism of the bulldozing away, of the pieces and all that, as if it's all just gobbled up in memory. That's why at the start of the show, I emphasized the importance of remembering justice, because we can lose sight of that and get really disheartened by this. I kept imagining what the families must have felt seeing that house swept away. I mean, listen, if you've lost a loved one, and I know, Chris, you and I have talked about this, it's hard to throw away even their shoes or the you know what I mean, their coat, their hat. You know what I'm talking about. It feels like you're throwing them in the garbage, and it's hard. Your heart can't do it. I still have things that belong to loved ones of mine that passed away. You know what I'm saying? Anyone who ever came into my office at Columbia for the decade or whatever that I was there, always wondered why I had a necktie on the coat hanger that was there. It never moved. I never wore it. It just hung there. Well, it was my father's tie. It was a tie my father wore when I got my doctorate, because he wasn't a guy that wore ties. So I thought the idea that he put on his Sunday best because it meant so much to him, the tie was always very symbolic of that pride. So I kept it. I couldn't bring it myself to throw it out, and I still have it, of course, hanging. But the idea is, it was like a symbol of him. And I think that house being swept away like that must have been really hard to the families. I mean, Chris, you've gone through mourning. You understand.
Well, and I did a whole program on it a while ago, and to this day,
yeah.
I still am convinced that is going to be one of the biggest mistakes that the prosecution made and the police. I mean, the prosecution signed off on it. Of course, they went to the defense. And what defense attorney in their right mind's not going to say, yeah, leave it up.
I thought
a defense attorney, if they're worth their salt, is going to say, absolutely, tear it down. Yeah, here, sign. Where do I sign? How do I get in there? Because even though, we're in modern technology, 3D technology, the FARO, and a variety of other, for the audience, if you don't know, I worked over 300 murders in my career.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm still working for a county. I can't tell you, I can't. Gary knows I go visit people every single day still to this day, interviewing, etc.
Yeah.
All right. Now,
we actually do this stuff, Chris.
We actually do this stuff. Yeah. And I thought to myself when I saw it, just the thought process, and it is so obvious that the school was behind it. They had made the decision, and this is just my opinion. They had made the decision that it was, much easier, touchy-feely, all this other stuff, that it comes down. But they forgot that that house in of itself is smaller than what people think it was. When you see it on the internet, it looks huge.
You've been there.
I've been there. Yeah, I stood right there. And then I thought to myself, you know what? If I was a juror, I want to know I want to know what it feels like. I want to know what it smells like. I want to see it. And and I've seen all the stuff. It was contaminated and biohazard and all this other stuff. Well, okay. So was Columbine. But it's still there. They didn't tear the high school down. Okay. And so I guess where I'm going with this, when we take that brick for the defense and we give them that brick, okay, of, okay, here's one for you guys. And then we got all this other noise out here, right? About, that it's a cartel hit and all, drugs and alcohol and party house. Okay, fine. Let's say somebody was doing drugs in the house. Okay, but again, let's go back to, if somebody was doing drugs, it doesn't mean everybody was doing drugs in the house, number one. And number two, it doesn't mean that that's a death penalty. Okay, by knife at 4:00 in the morning when you're in your bed. Okay, and cartels don't hit like that.
Right.
In Moscow, Idaho. I hate to break it to anybody, but, I was in San Diego County and, we actually dealt with the border where they would cut people's heads off and put them up on post in front of a 7-Eleven. Okay. That's reality. That's how cartels operate. But in this situation, all that noise is going on. And now we have another curveball. I guess where I'm going here is I'm stacking up on top. We have, this allegation that he was investigated for a home invasion about a year before the Idaho slayings.
Which we should say outright was found to be unfounded, right?
Well, the cops looked into it, and whenever something is suspended, okay, it doesn't mean that they've completely taken them out of the circle. What it means is that, they don't have further evidence or further leads, to chase it, right? But there are a couple of problems with both sides of the coin, okay? One, the defense is going to grab it, and that's what they call sod, okay? Some other dude. Okay? It's going to be the sod. That's going to be part of the sod defense. Okay, see, I told you it was some other dude. It was definitely not my client. Okay, definitely not my client. Okay, but that's also a two-edged sword. And the defense also knows that. And I don't know if the public's thinking about it yet. Okay. And the two-edged sword is, first of all, let me play the body camera video of your witness.
For you.
Okay.
Where did you see this person?
I was asleep, and then I woke up
Okay.
and it was just me and Sadie home at the time, and we both lived down in the basement, and my door was closed. I heard my door open, and I looked over, and someone was wearing a ski mask and had a knife like this.
Okay.
And so I, like, kicked the out of their stomach and screamed super loud, and they, like, flew back.
Okay. Rule number one, okay, is the height of the victim or the suspect in this case is approximately, I think they estimated 5 foot to 5'3". Okay. Bryan Kohberger is much taller than that.
Right.
Okay. Much taller than that. So that's going to be one of the discrepancies that law enforcement immediately is going to look at.
Back into my closet and then ran out my door and up the stairs.
Okay. And that's the last you know as they ran up the stairs?
Yeah. And then when they got home, this back door was wide open.
Okay. How long ago did this happen?
Maybe 15, 20 minutes at most.
Okay. And so between the four of you, it's the whole house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No one else is there?
There's another unit in the front, but there's just like one person that lives down there. And then the four of us live upstairs.
Okay, so you have similarities in relationship to a knife, early morning break-in, a ski mask, a female victim,
More than one person home.
More than one home, right.
I mean, there's another person in the house. Another woman is there, right?
She says she and her girlfriend were the only two in the house at the time, but there are 4 women. There are 4 living in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you look at those dynamics and you go, that's an interesting case. Let's look at that case, and that is why the police looked at that case. I'm sure of it. I mean, I would have said, wow. Wait a minute, what's going on here? Go ahead, Gary.
Well, the most important thing that we haven't mentioned is that it was referred to. Now, I don't know if this is true, but I saw this in the press, is that when there was a quote from law enforcement about it, they said something like, we have no reason to suspect that he was involved in this burglary at the time. So in other words, it implied that there was a motive that was not fantasy and all those things, that there was a robbery motive, and we don't see that. In
this case, I mean, we would call this what they call a hot prowl. And what a hot prowl means is somebody's home and the suspect has enough chutzpah to go into the apartment, to go in. And what's interesting here is the fact that whoever the suspect is carrying enough or carrying a knife. Okay. And so then we have to, apply that principle. Okay. Why are you breaking into this woman's apartment, or at least going into the apartment? But here's where a couple of things that I think folks.
Can I just comment on something that you just?
Of course, please.
So, first of all, let's make sure we emphasize that, as law enforcement did, that he wasn't even on the radar as an applicant, as I understand it, to go to school out there at that time, right? So that's already would be very. But the other thing is, what was it? I was going to say something else about that. Well, it'll come back to me. It just slipped out of my head. But Chris, you would agree that if robbery was I remember. I was going to say, in the crime classification manual, there is a category that John Douglas, Ressler, Anne, and Anne's husband, Alan, included, that's called secondary felonious rape, right? And what does that mean? It means that a person goes in to rob a place.
Right.
They discover that there's a young woman or a child or somebody that is there, and then they go up to the bed or they whatever, and they attempt something else. Now, we don't know if that was going on, but given the circumstance of, you know, being in the bed and getting close enough that she's got to kick out of them and the knife and the whole thing, I think we could use our imagination that of what might have been going on there, right? And I think you'd agree, Chris, that the evidence is suggestive of somebody who went into a house to rob it, saw a woman there, and perhaps got other ideas.
Right. I mean, or right. If we use, I'll call it, you know, the Lake and Riley effect, right? Where that predator, you know, he's an apex predator. I mean, that guy spent almost 2 hours at one apartment complex to get in, tried to get in, and then got so frustrated because she looked through the peephole, and then, you know, he ducked down, and then he took off. He got so frustrated that he went down the path, and that's when Lake and Riley came running by, and he took advantage of it.
Right, like an opportunistic. Well, that's exactly what I'm getting at.
That's why I'm bringing it up.
On the table, then I think, you know, now sometimes you go in to assault a person, and the robbery is secondary. You get in there and you go, hey, there's valuable stuff here. But my experience has been in looking at cases like this is that people that are going in there to commit that kind of assault, they have a different focus, and they sometimes don't want to leave evidence or whatever. So sometimes when they're robbing, it's more to give the staged effect that was the purpose originally or something like that. But my experience would suggest to me that this is a person who might have gone in to rob and then secondarily seen that there was a young woman sleeping and got an idea and was fought off.
Well, and I want you to listen to her verbiage very carefully.
I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
Where did you see this person?
I was asleep, and then I woke up
Okay.
And it was just me and Sadie home at the time, and we both lived down in the basement, and my door was closed. I heard my door open, and I looked over, and someone was wearing a ski mask and had a knife like this.
Oh, okay.
And so I, like, kicked the out of their stomach and screamed super loud, and they, like, flew.
Okay, you say, I kicked them blank in the stomach. That he screamed really loud, and they like. Now, part of the language there is plural, and when she says "and they like," okay. Now, and the reason I'm bringing this up because the prosecution's going to bring this up if the defense rolls this before a jury, okay? Because that victim is going to be on the stand, and the first question I would ask is, who's they? Was there more than one suspect? And remember, we always have to remember eyewitness testimony is the worst type of evidence you could really believe it or not, have sometimes, because it can go into so many different directions.
Right.
And because you listen here, she stays with that plural. Listen.
Flew back into my closet and then ran out my door and up the stairs.
Okay, and that's the last you know as they ran up the stairs?
Yeah, and then when they got home, this back door was wide.
Okay, even the officer repeats it back. Now, why am I even saying this? Right, go ahead. You say your thought, Gary.
Well, I think what you're suggesting, and I just, I want to make one other point to add to it, but I think what you're suggesting is that this is like a field day for defense, because they're creating a situation where you've now suggested a possible link that is going to be easy to dismiss, and then it's going to start to plant doubt in the mind of jurors who might say, well, if they were wrong about that, they could be wrong about this. Like, what kind of, Keystone Cops kind of situation is this? You see what I'm saying? So that you start working for the defense.
Well, and this is a good point here from PY, right? Well, millennials use they all the time to mean male or female. Okay. And that's going to play right into the prosecution's hand, because they're going to ask the witness, well, which one is it?
Right.
And that's going to create a whole new bucket of lanes that people are going to go down.
Well,
go ahead.
But what I think is also interesting psychologically is this: if Kohberger is guilty, and if he's the guy if he did this in the way we think in Moscow, you have to imagine how different the psychology would be of a person who would run away because somebody kicked out at him in the stomach. What would have happened with the kind of offender who committed Idaho is that the more kicking and screaming the person did, the more excited they would be and the more they would need to dominate and control, so that by putting up that kind of a fight, the person would all the more have to pin the person down and subjugate them, because the symbolism would be, I can't let you get away. What, are you kidding me? You're never getting away from me. So the idea, if anybody got away, it would simply be because of the arbitrary, capricious nature of the offender, who just decided, like one of those Roman emperors, you live and you die, like that kind of thing, right? And so the godlike feeling of the person. So I just kind of think that it doesn't make sense for the person who committed Idaho to do that, to run away, scurry off because of getting caught. I mean, you know what I'm saying, Chris. It would be part of the fantasy that the more you kicked and screamed, the more they would want to subjugate you, especially with the knife. Well,
and we have evidence that he killed the two girls upstairs, and then he runs into Ethan and Xana, second story. So he's not running away.
Not running away at all. As a matter of fact,
he's escalating. In fact, if he was confronted, go ahead.
I'm here to help. I mean, that's a person who's scheming and saying something even under the adrenaline pumped, kind of moment, is using a shenanigans to bamboozle and calm people and whatever. And so, if he was the one who said that and if he was guilty. But this is totally different. This is a person who was not cool under pressure, who went in, committed this robbery, had some amateurish idea of how to get away with it with a mask and, carrying a knife and whatever. And the minute she kicks out, he runs out like a squirrel, out of the house. It's just not consistent with the chutzpah of the guy who committed Idaho, with seeing all the cars outside, goes in anyway. You know what I'm saying? I mean, everything about that was risky.
Right, 100%. And also, if we now remember the guy who was on campus and the bicycle situation where he tells the four girls, "I'll stab you." Remember when that was going on?
Yes.
That's consistent. That kind of guy is more consistent with what this gal is talking about. And by the way, the best evidence that would come in a trial is this body camera video, because if they put her up there, if the defense puts her up there, then the prosecution's going to say, let's play the body camera video. And he's going to, that's the best evidence, because, it captured word for word, moment for moment, emotion for emotion as it was being presented. Okay? But remember, guys and gals, that back even before getting close to the attack on the 13th of November at 11:22, there were multiple incidents that led up to that night. One of them was the underwear incident on the street over from the car. Another was the camera incident where, unfortunately, Bryan offered to put in cameras at the gal's house. We don't know what the totality of the results of that are going to be. The other one, which to me has been very disturbing, and I think should continue, we need to continue to ask about it, is the dog, Buddy. Buddy the dog. I mean, the fact that he's named after my buddy, who's right behind me, by the way, everybody, he's sound asleep. The fact that it's 3 miles away from where the event occurred. The other one's 10 miles away. Then this one is 3 miles away. But this dog was skinned 100%, the fur was taken off of this animal like a bear rug. And that case is still under seal from the police department, because I've tried to get my hands on it 3 or 4 times, and they will not release that case.
Well, Chris, I'll tell you, if this guy is guilty, as I said, he would fall into that kind of mastermind, or at least, self-perceived.
Babs, I'm not talking about Murphy, that belonged to.
I mean, the dog that was
I'm
flayed.
talking about the dog that was skinned.
Yeah, and but if he does fall into that category, which is where I think he would certainly place himself if he was, if he did this. People like that think like a chess player, and what you have to imagine yourself into the way of thinking of that person. What a person like that would do is that by committing offenses in the area of where you intend to, you are frightening people into then saying, boy, I better get a security system. And then if there's a security system, it could be taken advantage of to look into a person's home. In the story about the woman where he may have, broken in, moved things around, scared her, then she goes and gets a security system which he helps set up, which would then allow him to look at her. If that story is true, I mean, it tells us that that's a ruse that he would have potentially used. So the question is, what might he have done to frighten the women in the sorority, in that house, to install cameras? And the panties incident comes to mind, within a stone's throw of the house. The dog story. So in other words, anything like that happens, certainly you view it through the lens of escalation if it's this guy. But it also raises the question of whether he was clever enough to know that if you frighten a bunch of people living in a house, they may install a camera that you could take advantage of. Now, the only reason I suggest this is because this is what's always bothered me about this. Now, I know we're going to get the whole reaction of, but they said there was no stalking, because, people don't understand. There's a legal definition of stalking, and if it isn't met, there's no stalking charged. But it's not possible to identify a stranger as a victim and go to their home without watching them in some way, right? Even if it's just on the street, you're surveying. I mean, we'd agree, right, Chris? There's some way of watching. And what always bothered me is if he got into that house and didn't expect all those people to be there, all I can deduce, or at least imagine, is that he somehow was aware of what was going on in that house. But then on the night of the execution of the plan, that thing has to be shut off. And then you're surprised that those people are there. So my theory was always that it was using something that was on the phone, because when it was put into pilot mode, he then isn't aware that Kaylee's there and the two are up and eating and the whole thing. So that I think what happens is he thinks, wow, my target victim is asleep and is in the house and is isolated. Perfect time to go in. And gets there, and lo and behold, the intel was wrong. So how could that be if there isn't some way of watching? So I've always been very suspicious that there was some means of doing that, which right now we don't know about.
Well, that's why I was always thinking about that cylinder block in the back of the house. I mean,
even looking in literally, right?
Yeah, I mean, voyeurism, right? I mean, he's sitting there playing a voyeur role, collecting all the fuel, i.e. his fantasy. And he did that for quite some time, in my opinion, to kind of build it all up to the point where I have said, and this is just my opinion, that Ethan is collateral damage.
I mean, it's painful to say that, but I know what you mean.
I'm not trying to be cruel to Ethan or her family.
No. I know the people have reacted in the past when we use that term, but I think we just mean from an investigative perspective, he was not an intended target.
Right. I think Ethan got in the way. I am still convinced that the house with 5 girls in it, all 5 of those girls were the targets. And I think one of them specifically, in my opinion, it was Madison, because Kaylee obviously was on her way out. I think if BK is our guy, he would have done his homework and would have known, and not necessarily choosing that particular night, because he would not have known if she was going to be there. She went by to show her car, and remember, she had that job lined up.
Yeah, right.
And I think the evidence will show at some point that there was some brutality that had taken place up in the upstairs room. And go ahead.
Well, the other thing is, Chris, is this. You and I have pointed out in the past that something that would have been very important for this guy from the perspective of ego is that he was good with this technology and kind of a surveillance thing. In fact, that he tried to get law enforcement to hire him, to work with them. And if that figures into the ego for such a person, we don't think it would have been incorporated into the offense? Of course. It doesn't make any sense otherwise. That was an expression of I'm smarter than you. I have a godlike ability to watch you without you knowing it. But I'm very troubled by the idea that there was a going out of the way on the part, I think it was even of the prosecution, to say stalking hasn't been charged. Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you're not watching someone in some way. You have to. If you don't know the victim, you have to study them and know. Right.
If we use Lake and Riley, again, going back to her for a moment, and we watch that video, and you guys can see it because I did a show on it recently, where he went right to that apartment. He went right to that apartment, and he spent over 2 hours trying to get into that apartment. And then the victim looked through the keyhole, or the eye thing, and he freaked, and he left, and he went down the path, and that just happened to be the path that Lakin chose to run down. But he had all that fuel already built up inside of him, all that frustration, and he attacked her. But in this case, I think his intention was to go into that house and to slaughter every girl in that house. And when he was done with Ethan and Xana, he was out of gas. I think he just ran out of gas. And that's why Dylan and the other young lady that he passed are still alive to this day. And I'll guarantee you, if they went in and talked to, like they did with Ted Bundy to try to catch, the Green River Killer, right? Ridgeway. If you were to go in to talk to those guys, what say you, Gary? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I certainly think that he was spent, that he was adrenally exhausted, that he, it had already turned out to be way more than he intended. My sense of things was that I'm inclined to think that there was a special, at least initial, focus on Maddie. That's always been my sense. And then it kind of went haywire. But I think that your theory, let's put it like this, it cannot be disproved. It certainly is in the circle of possibility. And I also think that there would have been a very special resentment of Ethan, because a male that is messing with your fantasy and is trying to be protective and potentially or whatever, I think would have been a huge problem for this person, whoever did this. So because I do agree that it was a misogynistic offense, almost certainly. So that I think the male being there would have been like, what are you doing here in this fantasy? Get out of here, and that would have been an object of very special. So I think that
what would Ted have done? What would Ted have done, Gary? If there was a male in the circle and he's already in that sorority house,
right?
Would that guy have gotten some special treatment?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, we know from other offenders what happens. I mean, for example, when BTK targeted a woman and was surprised to discover her brother there. You know, the brother was attacked. I believe
he shot him in the head.
So the idea being that there was a special kind of like, we must dispatch this male because they're messing with the fantasy thing. But I think that there would have been feelings of special kind of humiliation, and because remember, if you're an inadequate guy, and then let's say you go in and you discover that one of the women in the house is there with her boyfriend, he's an emblem of everything that you aren't, right?
That is such a good point.
Right, he's an emblem of everything you're not, and you're sitting there going like, get out of here, like you're showing attractiveness and power in routine ways. You're out of here, so I think there would have been a special hatred of that in the scene. And I also think that when it was all over and he's adrenally exhausted, remember that this is a guy who, by his own self-description online, if he wrote those posts about mental health online, remember that he talked about dissociating. He dissociated so much that he would look in the mirror and think that he was like made of meat. Remember that whole thing? People were meat, that there were, the visual snow, the whole thing. And I think you'd have to picture a person who is kind of spacey under emotional duress. I think he would have been emotionally overwhelmed. He's the kind of guy who lived a very mechanical, controlled existence and now let all the feelings out. And I think just would be kind of spacey. And I think on the way out would be dazed with the horror and the excitement of the thing. We also don't know, and I don't want to be inappropriate, so I'm going to say this gently. It's also possible that he had experienced some kind of climax or that kind of thing, and then felt that he had kind of achieved that and got out. We don't know. But Chris, would you be surprised if there was that kind of excitement for whoever did this?
Not at all. In fact, I can't help, the very first day that this happened, right? There are going to be a couple problems that the prosecution's going to have to overcome. Obviously, one of them is the time delay on the 911 call. That's obvious. Okay. But they may already have that answer. I don't know. But, the public feels that it's a problem. So right now in the court of public opinion, it's a problem, but that doesn't mean it really is a problem. They may have a solution for it already, right? I can't tell you how many times, I walked out of crime scenes and the public already had it figured out when they weren't even close. I mean, not even close. So
something you and I said before, if I remember correctly, before there was even a suspect. I remember we were talking about this, and I said, and everyone thought it was very interesting, I think, because based on the comments, I said, how does a sheath fall off a person's belt? Maybe they opened their belt. See, so I'm not so sure that there wasn't some kind of element like that, if you get where I'm going with that.
I know where you're going.
And if it didn't happen there, I would be surprised if it didn't occur afterward. And the reason that's important is because, again, we're talking about the playing out of a fantasy where a person goes in pumping with adrenaline. This is the night. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do that. And then imagine getting in there and nothing is what you pictured. Nothing goes according. Have you ever known a control freak in life? Have you ever encountered a person like that and seen what happens when things don't go their way? You ever been in a car with a person in the days before GPS where you had the big map unfolded and the person had it all mapped out? I'm going to arrive at 6:05 p.m. there, whatever, and then nothing goes according to plan, and they start screaming and yelling and going crazy and getting adrenaline pumped. Stop talking. You made me make the wrong turn. We would have been there. In other words, control freaks, that's what happens to them when things don't go as planned. Chris, have you ever known anybody like that?
Yeah. I just talked to a guy about a week ago. He shot a girl in the head.
Right.
Because fortunately, she survived. But he went in there to rape her with the intention of raping her. And he put his hand out, his left hand. He had the gun in his right hand. And he said, come here. And she goes, no, hold back, and shot her right in the head. And so that should answer this one. Lori, I appreciate it. You and I don't connect the dots in the same way. I concur. And I've met too many of these people. Unfortunately, my profession is to connect the dots. That's what I do. That's why people are in prison. 90% success rate, solvability rate. Gary knows. I have a solvability rate of 90%. It doesn't mean I can prove that you did it. I can just tell that if I put a set of bracelets on you, you aren't going to get out. You're gone for a while. And so with this kind of situation, with this guy, this situation, I am still convinced internally, I could be wrong. Absolutely could be wrong. But at the same time, okay, connecting the dots of why are you going to show up at 4 o'clock in the morning and know that there's a guy in there when your first targets are 2 women upstairs? Why don't you just kill the guy first? And now you got the whole house to yourself. You see, that's what people aren't thinking about. Everybody's got, the 2 girls downstairs acting as lookouts, and they're part of this big conspiracy to slaughter the rest of the house. Okay. That's just craziness, in my opinion. That's my opinion. Okay. That, these 2 girls, the survivors, are in any way, shape, or form involved in this incident, in any way, shape, or form. Because let's play this out. Okay. It's a secret sheath that is planted. Okay. And, let's crime sleuth this out. You have this sheath with Bryan's DNA on it. He could have touched it at a knife, gun show. And somehow whoever's going to go in there and commit the murders manages to get the sheath, and they carry it with them. They go in because it's a drug hit, and there's an informant in the house. But the plan is to go kill the entire house, or at least these 4, okay, and leave the 2, witnesses downstairs, or the lookouts, or whatever whatever the theories are floating around. Now, here's an honest question to anybody listening to that. Do you really believe that theory in any way, shape, or form? Honestly? Because, first of all, if you're a cartel and you go into a house, the first person they're going to take is the guy. He's going to be the first hit. And they're going to do it in front of the other 3 girls, the other 5 girls. Okay. He's going to be, sliced and diced in front of everybody. Number 1. Okay. Because that's the fear factor, because they dig that. They get off on that. Okay. Now you can control the other 3. And guess what? You have 2 witnesses who just witnessed the Sinaloa cartel whack 4 people. Guess what? They don't leave witnesses. Okay. Just ask any journalist in Mexico who's not around anymore. Okay. They don't exist. Witnesses are a thing of the past when you're dealing with cartel hits and dope hits. Okay. Those are myths in small communities. Okay. But when you've worked in a city in a county with 3.2 million people, okay, you actually learn certain things and you connect those dots pretty quick.
Well, Chris, what I think is that sometimes I envy people who have not been exposed to this stuff so much that they could look at this stuff and guess what happened pretty quickly. because they're still thinking the way that the average person who hasn't spent too much time in the hellscape that we've had to be in our work, right? Is that they're looking at this and they're thinking, I can't look at the world that way. I can't connect the dots in that way. But when you have experience with this stuff, there's not one thing that we said that a fellow expert wouldn't say, of course, because you learn the culture of this kind of these guys. And I'll tell you, I've always said that, once you do develop the ability to do that, life gets very dark. I always make the joke that the worst thing for someone to do is take me into a department store, because I can name a murder that happened with any object that is shown to me in the store. Anything. Pliers, screwdriver, hammer, saw, pieces of furniture, the microwave, the glass, the whole. And so that what happens is that your worldview gets changed. You see what I'm saying, Chris?
Absolutely.
And so that as a consequence, you lose your innocence in a sense. And then you look at it and you go, there's no other way to see it. Of course, that's what so that I understand. So I think sometimes when people look at it and going, it just doesn't make sense. It's usually because they're not accustomed to thinking in a way where psychosexual gratification and fantasy are a motive in and of themselves. They think along the lines of money, power, getting someone out of the way, jealousy, rage, a grudge, that kind of thing. But to get you got to go to the outside of that, and think along the lines of sexual gratification, power, domination, control, fantasy, whatever, to understand this kind of offense.
I want to show this.
And I think that's what. So maybe it just takes time. And then you start going, yeah, I see it that way.
No, it makes sense, Gary. It makes sense just for the audience. So that's me, and that's Dr. Skip Sperber.
Look at you, Chris. You look like one of those old cop show guys.
What? Mustaches were a priority at that. And do you know why we used to have mustaches? Because you can take Vicks and you put it on your mustache. And
were you a ginger? You were a ginger?
This is at the medical examiner's office.
Were you a ginger? Were you a redhead?
No. I'm still.
Oh, it's brown.
It was just parted down the middle, back from the 70s, back in the day. Okay. But where I'm going with this, before you started talking about my hair,
Tom Selleck-esque.
To your point. Okay, so Dr. Skip Sperber is a forensic odontologist, and he was also an expert at matching things. So whenever you had a body, to your point, Gary, and it had these weird things on it, then we would call Skip. He's world-renowned. Skip Sperber, Sperber. He was a forensic odontologist. I think we lost him recently, but this is my case, and that is a piece of wood.
Wow.
And that indentation is my victim's head.
Oh, Lord.
Into that wood. The suspect literally took the victim and smashed her into that 2x4. So I cut the wall. I took the entire wall down to the ME's office, and we matched her skull impression to that 2x4. Right there, you can clearly, well, I don't know if you can clearly see it, but if you look where Skip's ruler is, you can see the 2x4 exposed. And that is her indentation of her skull onto that wall. And I guess this, where I'm going here is, when we think about why would and it was a male on a female. Okay.
Yeah.
And Skip, I believe Skip did some of the bite work on Bundy.
He did.
Back in the day.
And Dahmer.
Yes.
Dahmer and Bundy. He was San Diego based, I think.
Yeah, he was my guy down in San Diego. Yep. Yeah. And whenever we had stuff, I mean, I've had, to your point, I've had pliers, meat cleavers, you name it. Just keep going down the list. Yeah. It's never ending.
Or anything like that. There are too many
Right.
disturbing. It's like PTSD land. You know, each thing is going to bring back memories. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? Yeah.
Yeah, and so with I guess where I'm thinking, okay, why would this guy go into that house, the perpetrator, knowing there was a man in there, knowing there was a guy in there? Okay, when he probably did enough surveillance. Wouldn't you agree, Gary? I mean, I don't think he knew that Ethan was going to be there, and that's probably, I'll bet you we'll see evidence at some point down the road that Ethan got some special attention.
Well, I think he really would have unexpectedly messed with a fantasy in a special way. There certainly would have been no male in this fantasy except himself as the master, of everything. And I think it's interesting, for example, that he picked a female attorney. So, right. Can you picture this guy with having to cooperate with a male attorney? I mean, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great point.
I don't think so. I think it's going to be very, very interesting when this story unfolds to figure out what that's about, what that need is about, But I don't think that's coincidence.
Yeah, it wasn't a planned. Here's an interesting thought. It wasn't a planned visit by Ethan. Didn't know he was there. Thank you, nobody. And it's just one of these sad situations, but at the same time, it's confusing. I think a lot of people that were not thinking through, okay, well, if Ethan's there, what else was this guy thinking about? And seeing how.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I show one more picture, Gary? Seeing how everybody's.
I just want to say that the people in the audience are pointing out that, which I had not heard, that the only reason that that's his attorney is because she was selected for him. That still doesn't take away from the point I'm making, which is that if it had been a male, it would have been interesting to see the differential in terms of how he would have behaved. But let's just say, I think he got lucky. I think he would have wanted a female.
So here's a better picture of my hair, seeing how you wanted to bring the hair up.
It's awesome. Look at you. You look kind of like right out of. You actually remind me of what was that actor's name? The one who did that movie, The Exterminator. Do you remember that movie, The Exterminator, about the guy whose friend is killed by thugs? So he goes out Death Wish style, and
people always used to say, John Ritter. I'd be like, from Three's Company. I'd be like, yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah. But it does look kind of all burnished, though.
We didn't know they took this picture. We were standing over a dead guy who tried to rob a hometown buffet, and guess who they were? They were the United States, the Marshals. Okay, they were U.S. Marshals, and guess who they were guarding? The Unabomber.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were two teams. There are two teams, and this was before he went to trial. And long story short, this was Salvador Hernandez. His street name was Pee Wee. He'd done 22 robberies, and these guys took a break. They took a break from doing what they were doing. They were at this hometown buffet having dinner. There were 5 of them, U.S. Marshals. Oh, and the other team had taken Ted. Okay. They were with him somewhere else in a different state. But these guys had come out for some live fire training out at Camp Pendleton. Mm-hmm. And they were doing all live fire training. At the end of the night, they came out in town, and they had one of the shooter, our guy, the good guy, was getting Jell-O at the dessert thing, and the suspect came in and turned and put a gun on the officer who was in plain clothes. They didn't know that obviously that guy didn't know that this guy was going to resolve the problem, and he did. He double tapped him from about 15 feet into the restaurant, and we were all standing over looking at him, and the newspapers were outside clicking, And we had no idea because I had my pen in my mouth. Had I known that, I wouldn't have had my pen in my mouth. But this is again. I go back to this idea of man, I'm having a hard time figuring out why in the world Ethan, or excuse me, the suspect here, going back to the year before,
right?
Why the girl was able to kick him out of the house. That wouldn't have happened. Evident in the fact we have Kohberger, if he's our guy, that took Ethan out. If you do a comparative analysis, it doesn't line up. So I think that's probably why they stepped back and said, you know what, although this is a good one, meaning it's something that they should look into because it is a problem, but they eliminate it. There's more information that we don't know yet.
Probably because it seems like such a fantasy-based defense. But the other thing is, Chris, that we also have to take into consideration is that if he began upstairs and then passed Ethan and Xana and felt compelled to do what he did, the reason that he may have slipped out without eliminating the two downstairs is that he also might not have considered them a threat. They might not have been, saying, who the heck are you? And, I'm going to kill you or whatever, right? I don't mean that in a victim blaming way. I'm just saying that he might have found a male threatening and he may have gotten down there and been like, and walked right out. Because remember that the colossal ego that we're glimpsing here is just, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the idea of thinking that you could do this and get away with it and the whole thing, it's just so ridiculous. But and I also think another example of that ego and that weird way of reading people is thinking that alibi is believable. You remember the big the build up to the alibi, like it was going to be this big exonerating thing. Yeah. And the alibi is the sheath that has touch DNA on it with like a 1 in octillion, whatever it is, chance of not being me, not being connected to me genetically. Got there somehow while I was stargazing in the park. I don't know if it was droned in, the drone dropped it out of the air, it flew in. It was like imagined into the room. Another guy came, took it from me and like went off, rubbed it against my fingers, then ran off with it. I mean, in other words, it's kind of ridiculous. And it reminds me of the kind of thing that a person who's bad at understanding people, who has an empathy problem or a problem of theory of mind or whatever, would think that someone would believe. We've all known people in our life who tell us stories that are ridiculous and think we believe them because they can't feel how stupid the story sounds, right? My mother always tells a story about a classmate of hers that would make up ridiculous stories like that, right? Yeah, right. Like one time she told me that the woman had dyed her hair. It was Catholic school, and she dyed her hair white. And when the nun yelled at her and said, "Why did you do it?" She said, "Oh, no, I went swimming this morning, sister, and the chlorine from the pool made my hair white. I didn't do it on purpose." Now, who would believe that? But there are people who tell stories like that and can't feel that you're going, yeah, okay, yeah, right.
Well,
say, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining, that kind of thing.
Well, but I think
the joke.
Right?
Yeah.
You and I are both in agreement that I think Ted Bundy is going to.
Yeah.
Do you agree that Ted Bundy is going to play a bigger role up here than any other serial killer? Would you?
Knowing what I do about violent crime and glimpses that are seen, that feel like somebody's methods were looked at and so forth, I have wondered, certainly more than BTK. Okay. I know there was an enormous emphasis on BTK for a few reasons. I think that started because he happened to be taught by someone who was the biographer of BTK. Right. And then people sort of played up that connection and it was all over the press and the whole thing. But I think when you really step back and you look at the totality of it, I would look more at people like Bundy or Rowling or certain people like that. And I think the connection to the state is interesting. The particular thing he's studying, the whole thing. It's interesting. Let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that he was learning about.
One of the interesting things that you had commented on, I think it went past a lot of people a while ago, but I'm going to bring it back up again. And none of this is confirmed in any way, shape, or form. However, in an investigative analysis aspect, you want to throw everything at the wall, and you want to ask, take the whys and then, figure them out. Okay. But what you had pointed out after his alibi came out, you pointed out, tell the audience again about.
I think what you're referring to is that park, the
Did I lose you? Did we lose Gary for a second, folks? Can you guys still see me, I hope? Gary's frozen right here. Yeah, Gary froze. Okay, so you guys can see me. So let me see if I can pull him back out. He's frozen. So he's going to have to come back in. But I'm gonna hold on here for a second because I want him to, can you guys see me? Yeah. Yes, I know you can. Okay, yeah, I'm good. All right, so let me text him real fast. Because, man, he was just right at that good part where he has a very interesting theory. And it's just a theory. None of it was, connected yet in any way, shape, or form, just FYI. I'm going to put the kids up here again. Every time I see this photograph, it's just like, wow. They will forever be frozen in time in their age. And it's the worst time of the year, holidays. Those of you who know about children who've passed. It's one of the most difficult, I think, Gethsemanes that God gives the human condition. Just so heartbreaking. Just so sad. Hang on for a minute. I'm going to try to get Gary back here. I just noticed, hang on. All right, he may have lost his power, I think. Oh, here he is. Hang on, Karen just brought my phone in. Thank you, sweetheart. Let me see here. All right. Modern technology, it's got to go to space. I just hit Gary up here again. And thank you guys so much for being here tonight. I hope this has been really eye-opening for you, at least, having a great conversation here. And we appreciate your insights as well, always. So great to have you opine here and weigh in. It's always neat to hear your opinions. A lot to always learn. I was just up in Ada. Oh, here he comes. Okay, good. He's back. Okay, you're back.
I was just saying about the park. We had some kind of outage that happened. I don't know if it's weather related or whatever. No, all I was saying is that although it's a very large park and it may have no significance at all, that I thought it was interesting that in that park area, and let me be clear that this is something that I'd still want to kind of geographically make sure we're talking about the same place. So, don't write home about this, But I just thought that perhaps it was interesting that it looks like this woman that was thought to be a victim of Bundy, a fledgling early victim of Bundy, was found dumped in a ditch in that park. And if it turns out that it is the same, and I could be wrong, but if it turns out that it's the same park, it's extremely interesting that one might make that the place where, they were when.
Well, they were never able to connect it to Ted, but in the law enforcement circles,
Right, he was wondering about, right. I think the guy that killed her had like a VW bug and looked like Ted, but it was like one of those things where it couldn't be connected. And I know for sure that it wasn't a case he was asked about when they went in and tried to tie.
Right.
So, but people I think it's because it is true that it was when he was out there for school, but that it was somebody that they sort of said it could just be a coincidence or whatever. But she certainly the victim did look like a Bundy victim, so to speak, with the parted hair and the certain physical appearance that he seemed to go for. And there was some, I believe, description of the person that had been seen following her around. So it's interesting. Now, but it's one of those things where what happens is when you talk about it, then people go in, they say, "Oh, you idiot, that's a different school, you're making a connection." All I'm saying is it's an interesting coincidence that the same park area is where.
What park? What park? Do you remember the name of it?
It's Wow. It's something like
one. It's the same one that Bryan said he went there to study.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, which kind of got kicked off the thought process, and I think
could mean nothing. Yeah.
Right. So the public, for our audience here, one of the things that it's interesting to always remember is whenever you're doing an investigative analysis aspect, here it is, Wahi Wahi Park or something like that. Here it is. Okay.
That's it. Wahi. And if you look, you'll see that this woman was, very young, vibrant, attractive young woman who went to school, I think, at Pullman. And then, she is killed and is found in a ditch. And they think that's who did it. It's never gotten solved. It's a cold case. Really interesting coincidence. Now, I did talk to someone who has a very good knowledge of Bundy. And the person made the same point. Look, he couldn't have been a very strong suspect because why would they have, they not have asked him about that suspect when they were asking about all the other ones? That's interesting. It almost makes me wonder if they did, and I don't remember it. Was it mentioned in one of those interview books where they went in and talked to Bundy, and maybe, that's something somebody read and kind of knew that. I have to look. But it's also interesting. The person made the point that it would be such an obscure fact. You would have to have an incredibly intimate knowledge of Bundy to know that. So I don't know, but Bundy did study out there.
Well, and it's to dovetail into your thought when you first brought it up, and we started chit-chatting. Yeah. And of course, mind you, for the audience, just so you guys know, this is, whenever behind the scenes things are like this are going on, this is just a behavioral analysis aspect. It doesn't mean it's fact. It doesn't mean, you can tie it one way or another, but you do have to talk about it. You have to, investigators with docs like Dr. Brucato, and others, Ann Burgess, I could just keep Dr. Ramsden, you go down the list. You have to talk about it because they can open up your thought process in your mind as an investigator to go, oh, okay, well, that's something that should be considered. And this is exactly how he presented it to me. He says, this is something that we should think about. It doesn't mean it's legit. It doesn't mean it's connected. But don't you think, and you'll often hear Dr. Brucato go, don't you think? Okay, that's just habit for him because he does this all the time. And then it gets me thinking, and then I start throwing spaghetti on the wall like my friend eating here this evening that I just put up a moment ago. But it's so fascinating sometimes because when I started thinking about it, I was like, that's kind of crazy, Gary. I mean, what are the odds of, Bryan Kohberger picking a park that maybe could be connected to, somebody that he was studying? We don't know. We do not know. And they were not connected to Bundy. The victim was not connected to Bundy, but
well, people, let's say that a lot of people feel that was a case that probably, he should be looked at, but that he got away with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very interesting.
Interesting.
But again, every time that's come up, there's an incredible mockery, from the peanut gallery that tries to, reject the notion, because you know how it is that people love my new favorite thing that people do in the true crime community, and I mean that sarcastically, is they like to take the content of a show and they review it, like the Siskel and Ebert of true crime, right? So they put it on the screen, paying no mind to the idea that they're using the footage that doesn't belong to them, and they just mock it like from an armchair. You know what I mean? It's like that the person who sits in the movie theater and says, boy, the director should have known to use a different shot than that. If I were in his shoes, I would have done whatever. And you want to turn around to them and say, what do you do? Salt the fries? Like, what are you doing, right? It reminds me, one time I went to go see a Broadway show on a date. And I had a guy in front of me that I think must have been at least fancied himself a choreographer. And through the entire thing, in a loud voice, kept tapping the person next to him going, these people don't know what they're doing. They're mixing styles. They're whatever. So in the intermission, I couldn't take it anymore. And I said, could you please, whatever. And he said, my opinions are very important. People may be interested. I said, not during the show, right? So I said to him, there's an old expression, those who can't do, criticize. And he, in the loudest imaginable voice, he said, I just want you to know, sir, I do. And I said, that's so easy, I'm going to leave it there. You do. Leave it there. Have a good day. And, but it's like that, that type that they criticize because they, and so what happens is when you're brainstorming like this, you're going to see people, they knock you, they whatever. And so let me put it out there. Let me put it out there that I am only talking about this like a kind of a thought experiment, right? I have not sat down and clearly delineated, that we're talking about the same exact area, which side of the state line it's in, none of that. It's just some really interesting coincidence that I think raise something that one might want to sleuth about, right? And but anyway, boy, did that drive me crazy, that guy. But Chris, what I'm talking about, the true crime world has descended into this, like anybody who's got a microphone is an expert, kind of thing. It's like going to the doctor and saying, how many years did you go to school? None. But I've seen people use a scalpel. You can lay down on the table. I'll be happy.
We're all experts. We're all experts. In fact, somebody asked me what I was doing out of Ada, last week. And hang on for a minute. Whoops. I don't know what happened. It's not important. But I was out working with an agency out there, one of the reservations. I got to close this out. Sorry, I'm doing three things at the same time.
Yeah.
And we had a super great class, great group of people. And we went to the Chickasha folks up there, and me and Steve Johnson. If you've not ever had a chance to see Steve,
I love him.
Oh my gosh,
a guy who's up there in the IQ department. That's why I like him. He's so bright,
Steve is an amazing human being.
Smart
and
guy.
He's one of the brightest bulbs in the shelf.
He's in our foundation.
Yeah, he's on our foundation, and but he and I went up there and we taught this class. Show you real fast. on apex predators, kind of like Dr. Brucato's talking about here. Well, I guess that doesn't want to work. Anyway, it doesn't want to work. So that's important. It's no big deal. But anyway, we talk up there apex predators and behavioral interviewing in relationship to these guys. And we had a great time. The week before that, I was in Washington State, up where the Twilight series up in Fork, working with one of the tribes up there. We do a lot of work with the Bureau of Indian Affairs still. You know, there are over 6,500 missing Indigenous women that were missing out of Canada and about 1,800 here in the United States. And we work with those task force. We teach them how to catch the guys, the bad guys, basically.
Our buddy is in the chat, Chris.
Who is?
Josh.
Oh, Josh is in there?
Yeah, he just said hi. He's just popped up.
There he is.
What's up, Josh?
If you're not a subscriber to the lab, get over to the lab and subscribe.
Yeah.
We love Josh, and he's just an amazing human being. Amazing human being.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
And I also noticed we got a hello from another YouTuber named 12 Gauge who has been doing this meticulous breakdown of the categories in New Evil. Just been pretty interesting, I have to say.
Breaking down your book?
Yeah, he's up like category 13 right now, and he just takes weeks and just goes through it meticulously, and it's pretty interesting because it then launches into these interesting discussions about, you know, to more deeply understand the categories, which is something that I'm surprised I've never had anybody ask me to do. No one's ever said, let's break down all 22 categories. I guess by the time you get up to 22, it would be so bad. I mean, they'd be yanking you off YouTube. That's the problem. I mean, you just can't, you know what I mean? Because that's the whole point, is that it's evil and it's horrifying. And so I think that's the problem, is you have to just sort of like loosely hint at what it is. But I mean, we were able to get it through as a book, but let's just say it's not popping up on, you know, NPR anytime soon or something, you know, with the whole world listening to it. It's disturbing.
Do we think BK went back to the scene?
Personally, or just that? Yes, I do think so, because looking at the behavior of people who I think were similarly inclined in terms of style and purpose and whatever that I'm glimpsing here. This is the kind of person who would have liked seeing the commotion of the police descending on the place, but also would have liked seeing the bungling, you know, would have snickered to himself at the sight of people doing stupid things, getting the wrong impression, whatever. And I think would have felt very powerful. Remember David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, who was also like whoever the Idaho killer is, a category 16, I think. He would set fires, and people would descend on the scene to put the fire out, like in a garbage pail on the street or whatever. And then he would get aroused. And I always said, considering him a kind of pyromaniac who was aroused by the fire is missing the point. He was not aroused by the fire. He was aroused by the power of controlling all those people that came to the scene. It made him feel like God, you know? And that's the thing. I think there's a godlike feeling that comes from that. And I also think people want to look at the work they've done. I also think this is the type of person who, if he had not been captured, would have felt a very strange need to insinuate himself into the funeral services and possibly even, you know, mourning that might have taken place on the campus, that would have, you know, possibly gone to the grave. You know, that kind of person, Chris,
Yep.
you know, they, in fact, that's one of the techniques they use, you know, that where they hold a public event. We're going to talk about who might have done this. And like right there in the audience is the killer, right? So yeah, yes, I absolutely do think that this kind of person would not be able to resist. In fact, Chris, I've always thought if I were to ever go in and meet Bryan, he would know who I was. He would have seen me talk about him well before the capture. Same thing with you. He knows who we are because he would have seen us. I think he would have watched this stuff at the time. Don't you?
Well, if that's an invitation, well, I'd love to go. Let's go talk to him. After it's over, either he's been set free or he's convicted. Either way, Bryan, if you're listening, we'd like to come talk to you one day. So, but we'll hold that. Here, Misty has a question. Have there been any other serial offenders who were vegan?
I actually have one in my database. I remember I looked this up before.
Who's that?
I'm going to look, and I have it right here in my file. 1 minute. I'm going to tell you. I gave this answer once before. Somebody asked me, and there was one in my entire list.
You see, everybody, this is 119 years worth of data here.
No. That's the mass murder work.
That's the other one. This is the other data.
Right, but I also keep databases of. That's the one I did with my colleague at Columbia. But I keep databases of every imaginable thing. I mean, if there's a crime, I enter it into my spreadsheets so I can do a quick search, like out of this number of cases, how many people committed murder with this item? How many of them, were between this age? How many of them, the victim was this? So that it allows me to come up with statistical odds. And that's a point that I remember I made it to Dr. Ramsland's class talking about crime generally. And she told the class, it's very important to pay attention that what Dr. Brucato was saying is that profiling should be based as much as possible on statistics. So that it's not, feeling things out, right? Like there's statistics to it, right? Like, just like I said, the probability of the person having X traits because they used a knife is higher than if they. So I think whenever you could use statistics would be good. But give me a minute to find it because I do have it in here. I remember there was one other serial killer who identified as.
Ellie says the peanut gallery will love that.
Right, and I do think that I do think that this is a person who right now is a mass murderer, but who has motivations that look more like a serial killer. Because why do people commit mass murder generally? It's not the fulfillment of perverse fantasy or anything like that. It's usually a person who lacks a coping mechanism or has a cause and a message that they snap and they kind of go out and do this, right, with this wide-ranging kind of emotional explosion. And or they plot it and scheme it to express that. It's very different than the person who's motivated by a need to dominate, control, and through psychosexual reasons. But I will give you the name in a minute. I just have to pull it up.
Okay, so
because I have to step away from here.
Jen says that Bryan is not a vegan. He was anti-meat. Dig deeper. My wife is a vegetarian, and sometimes even combo vegan. So that's a good point. But he did make it clear to the jail that he only wanted vegan meals. So I don't know. Maybe there's something that we don't know that he told the jail.
I have some idea about it. I mean, we'd have to find out the motivation. There are different reasons why people. And let me be clear: I'm an animal lover, so I have no problem with.
Yeah,
I think it's a beautiful thing if a person chooses that lifestyle. I understand it, but there are different motives why people do things, right?
Yeah, Karen doesn't eat meat because she was on a youth trip one time and they were hanging, sausage and stuff like that, pepperoni. They went to this one place and she got sick and she's not eating meat. She will every once in a while, but my sweetheart, so we're tracking you guys. We're tracking with everybody. Here's one here. I'm vegan. I eat meat too. The lab. There you go.
That's hilarious. The lab. Yeah. So are there any other questions we can address while I'm finding that?
Yeah, sure. Let me, there's one, actually there are comments. Let me see if I can find another question. Guys, you got a question for Dr. G here before we're into this? Okay, here it goes. Does motivation matter in diet? I'm a vegetarian for animal reasons, not healthy reasons. I agree. Okay, so it's more of a comment. Thank you so much. Quite frankly, I don't care what Bryan Kohberger eats. just my personal opinion, I mean,
Right.
I know if he's the suspect, we know he kills, but if he's not, then, I don't think the prison's going to make an exception to his meals, to be honest with you. He's going to have to figure out how to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and bologna sandwiches on Tuesday and avoid all those guys with soap in a sock, because he'll be a target if he ever is, put into prison. They'll come after him because he's raised his profile so much.
I think the person that I was thinking of, as I'm digging through this, I'm pretty sure that the person I was thinking of was William McDonald, who was
McDonald's, that doesn't sound right.
That's hilarious. But I think he was Australia's first serial killer. They used to call him the Sydney Mutilator. He was a castrator. He was really terrible. He actually had he was authentically disturbed. He had schizophrenia, but he was, in addition, had this kind of quality of being kind of psychopathic and all that at the same time. He was at least a vegetarian, but some think went all the way to true blue veganism. And it was interesting because he was somebody who had a disgust at the idea of the mutilation of animals of any sort, and yet was capable of brutalizing humans. I also remember hearing, although I never confirmed it, that Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, was compelled toward veganism. Although, I'd want to look it up to see what I have in my records here, but I believe I heard that he was somebody who was compelled that way. There were a few that identified, I know, that were vegetarian. But as far as true veganism, it's quite unusual. But somebody in the audience is making a joke about old MacDonald had a farm, making it especially disturbing. The guy's name was yeah, there you are. That was MacDonald. But yeah, I think he was at least a vegetarian, possibly all the way over to veganism. But that's the only one.
But does that make a difference, Gary? I mean, in their psyche?
Well, it's a fascinating thing, that, because it makes me think, number one, of the way that animals are not capable of the cruelty people are. Dostoevsky famously said that even if he could think of it, a tiger would not nail a person up by the ears. Only a human would think of that. That's why one of the things I resent most is when people say that a person who does very evil things acted like an animal. It drives me crazy. No, they did not. An animal, because they don't have language and meaning in the way that humans do, are not capable of that kind of inventive cruelty, of doing things just for the evil amusement of it. They just go for the jugular, and that's the end of it. And so I think there's a different feeling people have about animals. They're predictable, they're loyal, they when they do what they do, it's just out of adaptation, and and I think a human is capable of so much more cruelty. And I would say that's one reason. And another reason is that there is this kind of interesting quality with people where sometimes they doth protest too much. They have a horrible fear of something because they actually like it so much, right? Think, for example, of the preacher who gets up on Sundays, screaming and yelling about his hatred of, I don't know, gay people. And then you find out, the next week that he's been arrested, with a male prostitute in the toilet, at an airport. And then you go, maybe that's why you hated them so much. Yeah, very funny. But it's like, maybe that's why you hated them so much, right? It's a projection of the hatred of your own quality, right? That projective identification. Another example of that is, I remember talking to somebody once, incarcerated, who said that they were so afraid of the sight of blood that it would make them pass out, that they had years of that, and then they killed someone and were incarcerated for it. And I said, boy, the idea that looking at blood made you pass out, it's almost as if you were protesting too much how much you loved it, the sight of it, right? Imagine that you have to fight so hard against the psychic attraction to something. You have to believe you're afraid of it or you hate it. So there's an interesting thing about people like that. Oh, I couldn't harm a fly, like Norman Bates, but meanwhile you butchered. Right. So it's kind of interesting. Michael Stone used to think, in one of my many fascinating conversations with Michael had this theory. It's like, it's out there, but he's not the first person, I think, to think of it. He had this idea that serial killers liked killing cats because they were so archetypically feminine. He thought their faces looked like the faces of women.
Interesting.
Small triangulated faces, the eyes far apart, the little mouths, etc. He thought they were these sort of strange substitutes for women. And then I found some quotations from killers that made me think he was right. But it is interesting to think about that, what gets projected onto these poor creatures, And but if you think about it, they don't hurt anyone. I can't understand it. Are you one of those people, Chris, when there's like a news story about hurting animals, like they'll say a whole family was murdered today by an intruder or whatever, and I'm like, oh my God, that's horrible. And then they're like, and the dog was killed, and I'm like, what? Like, it's like the flames are coming out of my ears, because there's something special about that, about the kind of person that would also kill.
I can't hurt an animal.
Yeah, I can understand it.
I just can't do it.
Right. I always say the fact that, like, I always say to people who feel very lonely and hated by the world, I always say, do little kids like you? Like, when you go visit your family or whatever, do the kids hang out with you? And they're always like, yeah, they like me better than the grown-ups do. And I'm like, how about the pets? Do the pets like you? And they're like, yeah, the dog doesn't leave me alone. The cat. I'm like, you're not a bad person. Kids and animals know.
They know.
They like you. You ain't bad.
They size you up pretty fast. I don't get invited. Karen, I joke with Karen all the time. We don't get invited to many dinner parties because, Karen will be like, don't talk about what you do. Don't tell them your stories, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so why are we going? But animals, I love animals. I've always loved animals ever since I was a kid. And I actually had a caper not long ago, actually, in Reno. Tom, if you're listening, Tom Green, Tommy called me up and said, hey, they got a guy in a hotel over there, and he had just mutilated animals in the bathtub in the hotel, and they had used duct tape and just all kinds of craziness. And anyway, I weighed in, and I told him, I said, dude, I said, is he hooking up with, ladies of the evening? Yeah. Okay, well, you got a real problem here.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, anyway, that's, I can't do,
right.
I don't have any patience for anybody that hurts an animal. Hang on, let me get Buddy so the audience can know.
Yeah. But Kohberger didn't kill
Buddy real fast, and that'd be a good segue out. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the dog was spared.
Yeah. Good point with Murphy, the dog.
Yeah.
And they found dog hair at the apartment, animal hair.
I know we got somebody in the audience that says we're talking too much about this. We have to change the subject.
Yeah, exactly. Hang on for a minute.
Well, animals are, they're more predictable than people. If you're trying to turn people into a science. I don't think cats are cruel. I think humans project that onto them, but I don't think they're.
Anyway, speaking of gigantic meatloafs, my Jack Russell here. Hang on.
Oh, God, look how cute he is.
Oh, but say hi to everybody. Say good evening. Tell him what Santa brought you. I just woke him up. He was sleeping on the floor, but Santa brought him a new lammy that he's been shaking all through the house, and I caught him with a piece of but can you tell everybody hi?
Adorable.
Everybody, thank you. Subscribe. Hit the like button.
Yeah.
Put your claws on the like button.
Did you ever see Josh's dog?
He's a good boy. Hang on.
You gotta see Josh's dog.
You go lay down.
Yeah,
Now
no,
he's staring at me. He wants to.
did you ever see Josh's dog?
Whose dog?
Josh from the Lab's dog.
Oh yeah. He's a cute button.
Beautiful. I love them. But you know, that question of keeping the dog alive is interesting. And I've always been interested in the hair that was found in the, you know, I mean, is it going to be dog hair? I think that would be pretty damning. You know, now, you know, Chris, one of the things I think, just to not miss the point of this show that you did, is I think what you were really getting at is that talking about this home invasion that, you know, the press gets all excited or whatever, but it's a non-starter. It was ruled out. They don't think it, you know, and it's sort of like when they talked about the woman in Pennsylvania who was that you know, did he kill her too? Remember that whole thing? And you know, it sells papers, it gets people. But the truth is that the defense gobbles this stuff up because what it does is number one, it makes it harder and harder and harder to get non-biased jury members. You know, what are you going to do? Go to the middle of nowhere to get people who haven't heard? You know, they're living under a rock. You know, and it's also very hard because when you have all this linkage stuff, you know, it's easy to say, see how much crap is out there, you know. So I really appreciated the effort to kind of say, let's get on record saying like this doesn't look related, like, you know, some things are just wrong, you know. And I think it's unrelated. I mean, even just based on the height, him not even being out there at the time, the behavior at the scene, all of that. The other thing I think I noticed some people do, especially the whippersnappers, you know, in the audience that are judgy of the things you say and all that. I think it's important to understand that it's very important when you're engaging in a logical exercise to be open to anything. You cannot go into it with a preconceived idea, like, I just don't think this guy's guilty. Because then what you're doing is you're creating like a syllogism where the premise is off and you're building everything based on that, right? So you wind up with it just doesn't add up, you know, kind of thing, because you've made an assumption, and then of course the irony of that kind of individual is they're going to accuse you of doing that you're assuming guilt, you know, and you're going into it like that. No, I think what you and I are doing is we're saying, based on odds, experience, statistics, or whatever, this is what most people would be motivated by who do this. So if you're making a bet, you know, and let's just say that the profile that we created, if this guy isn't guilty, it's a pretty amazing series of coincidences about that he looked exactly like what we foretold the person would be like. Could be a coincidence, but it sure is interesting. Don't you think?
Absolutely. You know, I learned a long time ago that nameless faces and avatars,
Oh yeah,
they don't count.
I know.
I mean, but look at this. Gummy Bear says, would you consider analyzing the Setagaya case in Japan, 22 plus years cold with DNA fingerprints evidence left, family of 4 murdered?
Mm-hmm. Tomorrow's the anniversary. Tomorrow's the 24th anniversary of that, if I remember correctly. And I know about it. It's you know, I think it's unsolved and, you know, a very interesting case. Sure. I mean, I think in fact, Chris, it'd be a very interesting show even for us to talk about together. Are you familiar with that case?
I'm not. What part of Japan is it in?
It was Setagaya in Tokyo. It was basically, you know, like a home invasion kind of situation, but really, really awful. But I think it was a knife murder. You know, people killed at home, and I think it would be interesting to talk about. Gummy Bear often makes very nice comments and very bright and interesting person. So, but yes, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was December 30th and 31st of 2000. Because I happen to know because I was looking at it recently, and things stay with me like that. So look it up, see if I'm wrong, but I think so.
Yeah, no, this is that would be really unusual for Japan.
Well, that's why, you know, Japanese serial killers and mass murderers are very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's cultural, right? There's cultural differences, and
Right.
so I think it was I just want to emphasize that I think you did a good thing by kind of putting it out there, saying, like, from an expert perspective, like, don't go down this path, But I also think it's smart because it's a way of kind of preventing a conflagration that you can almost imagine the defense going, goody, like this will help.
Oh, it's a win for the defense. There's no question about that. And they'll use it to their advantage. But I just don't want the family to get disappointed. I've we're in communication with the family a lot. And, this whole thing has just been an unbelievable.
Oh God.
What about we can't even understand it.
What about the trial moving? I mean, wouldn't you, if I had a child and my child was murdered brutally, I would want to be there in that courtroom every single day.
Yeah.
Now, what if it turns out that I can't get there because I've got to work? It's far away now. I don't have I can't get there. I would be horrified by that. And I think not having the family members in the room is also a win. Because if the family members can't get there, there's nobody sitting there for the jury to look over and see the tears in their eyes and humanize the victims. Oh, this 12 gauge is thank you, 12 gauge. Thank you for.
Go watch his stuff. He's doing a whole program on Dr.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. He's a therapist, a really nice guy. I think a therapist. But Chris, I think you'd agree that it's also a win the fewer family members you have there, because the family members, they create sympathy. You look at them in the eyes and you know that these were people who were killed. And you know what I'm saying? So the farther you get, it dehumanizes. It makes it like without the house and the whole thing, it's like you're talking about something that happened so long ago in history that you can't feel it anymore. It's like when you read about the tortures of the Spanish Inquisition, your brain kind of puts it in a box of like, did that really happen?
Right.
You dehumanize.
Well, and that's why I think the measurement of that house being gone is there's going to be one juror,
right,
who's going to want to go, yeah, but and I've seen it. I lost a case years ago. It was a small child
mm-hmm.
and a shaken baby. And I'll never forget it, that it went to the jury, and the defense's argument was the baby was being burped at the time.
I hate those
by the offender.
Yeah.
And the jury came back and said, yeah, we believe the baby was being burped. And the person walked. Meanwhile, it was such an obvious situation. The medical evidence was overwhelming. And these are the kind of things when we talk about, the family, we talk about victims. You and I talk from a position of authenticity, and where we've sat with victims, we've sat with families, and we've sat with the perpetrators. And that's you learn empathy as well. I just taught this class, like I mentioned a little bit ago, about the most important tool for any detective and any person conducting investigations is a chair. And I put the chair in the middle of the room.
Yep.
And I said to them, once you learn how to operate this chair, i.e. talk to people.
That's right.
And treat them with empathy, understanding, it doesn't mean you're going to agree with them. Obviously, you don't agree with anybody that's taken a human life. That's the ultimate sin. But at the same time, they are human beings. And they may have some redeeming quality inside. I don't know. I'm not the judge of that. But there are also other people like Brandon Wilson who looked right at me mid interview, 3 hours into the interview, which I don't show. And he looked right at me and he stopped. And he said to me, you know who I am. And I could feel the room change. I could feel something enter that room, and it was definitely not Brandon Wilson. And I said to myself, I looked over at Tom and I said, yep, my partner at the time. I said, I know exactly who you are. I'm going to take a break. And I walked out.
Yeah.
And when I got outside of that room, Tom looked at me and goes, dude, he said, did you feel that? I said, yes, I did feel that. And there are two forces in this world, good and evil. And when they get confused, i.e. they cross over, then evil will take advantage of it, no matter what. In any situation, they will take advantage of it. And I'm here to tell the world, you know, my personal experience, my personal testimony about good and evil. It exists. Gary, you worked in your residency at the ER and all kinds. I bet you got stories that could go on for months.
Oh, you mean when I was in training to become a
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, ever since I was a teenager, I worked with people who were seriously mentally ill or criminally disturbed. And that doesn't include, you know, literally thousands of people that I've evaluated, you know, or people in private practice who have been victims of crime or going into a jail, prison, you know, whatever. I mean, yeah. I mean, there are some, and don't forget, I was in seminary too.
Yeah, we're studying to be a priest.
Yeah, and there are times you encounter things that really give you a sense, you know, where you have to step outside of the clinical box and say, I am in the presence of some kind of darkness that is unfathomable to the average person. Now, you don't have to, I mean, some people take it all the way into the preternatural and say it's evil in that way. I'm saying that you walk away with a sense of like, this is beyond human understanding, how somebody could do this. Like the case I wrote you about today, Chris. That was true, right? So, but I won't even say what happened here because it's too disgusting. But I guess the point is there are going to be times you're going to encounter that. But yes, your point about the seat is very important. There are interview techniques I won't share because it's sort of like tipping off people by sharing them. But there are things that are very powerful that you could do in interviewing that psychologically sway people one way or the other. I mean, remember when John Douglas went in to talk to the offenders for his study with Anne and everybody? When he went to talk to Manson, he remembered that Manson saw himself as a kind of Christ figure, and he was a tiny guy, and that he had a need to lord it over people, no pun intended. And so he allowed Manson to sit with his rear end on the back of the seat, and they all sat in the seat so that Manson could talk down at them, because their theory was that if he felt that he was in control like that, he would never stop talking.
That's right.
And he was right. Right?
Yep.
That, you know, there is a kind of symbolism. Chairs are powerful symbols. And as I've said on your show before, at the holiday season especially, remember the empty chairs that these family members are going to experience. And I think if we're going to end, a good note to end it on is to remember the people looking at the empty chairs. That there are families, you know, that the holiday's been held for them.
Yeah.
3 years now, right? Well, thank you again, and so that you picture them at the table, kind of going like, that's where our child used to sit, right? Chris, you know the pain of the empty chair.
I know the drill.
You know the pain.
You know the drill. Everybody has a Gethsemane. Every single human soul, every person, doesn't matter good or bad. You know, can they learn empathy? No, not necessarily. Some people just can't get there. But when you really start digging into every suspect that I've ever interviewed was victimized in some way. They don't wake up and just decide to do A, B, C, and D. If you really go into their past, and let's look at Kohberger one last time for 30 seconds, and then we're going to go to Hawaii, where it's Akamai and Mele Kalikimaka, right? Merry Christmas and happy holidays. And Hanukkah just started on the 25th, so we're still into Hanukkah. To all of our Jewish friends out there, shalom and enjoy Hanukkah. But with Bryan, for an example, he was a heroin addict. What was he running from? What was he running from that ultimately turned, and Feliz Navidad, Tina, that he turned into this, person that would go so far as if he's the guy, and the court will sort that out. But where did they go? I'll never forget. I talked to a gal. Her name was Valisa Rayjoy. I was the last person to talk to her. She was working the streets. I was in Vice at the time, 1985. And I asked her, I said to her, Valisa, what are you doing out here tonight? You need to go, you need to get out. And she just opened up her life. And I just listened. I just stood there on the street. My partner and I just listened to her. And I had this premonition for some reason to try to get her off the street that evening. Well, she ended up being one of Porter's victims. Oh. Up in the mountain, right? We had, Gary knows, in San Diego County, we had 43 body dumps. And Valisa was one of them. And I was the last guy to talk to her. And I thought to myself, man, what could I have done differently?
That's very interesting. I didn't know that, Chris.
Yeah, I know, right? And no, but there we were. And that's, that everybody has a story. It doesn't matter who you are, what you are, where you are. Right. Some of it's the wiring's not connected correctly. I mean, look at this savage that burnt the girl on the train right near you. What the heck?
But Chris, even people who are hard, if you want to have the theory that a small number of people may be kind of hardwired a certain way, even they, if treated right by life, can turn that into a pro-social way. I'm convinced of that. I think a lot of the people who are fearless and are willing to do things the rest of us won't might have been people with vaguely psychopathic brains that were loved. So they became, people that were able to do these things that the rest of us would be too self-preserving to do.
Yeah, but how did they get that far out, Gary? I mean, you and I've been in this business a couple of weekends. Okay. And I'm older than Gary, by the way, for the record. Okay. Gary, you're still a pup. I still got you. But, the idea, how do they get this far out to where, some of the stuff that we've experienced and others, that they're doing this crap? It's like, what is going on? And do you think culture is playing a role in any of this today?
Of course, because if these things weren't cultural, they'd be happening at the same rate, percentage-wise in terms of the relative to the population of every country. That doesn't make any sense. If it was purely biological, it would just be true everywhere, and it isn't. If it was just mental illness, it'd be the same everywhere, right? It's just a thing that happens on a bell curve. But there's something very special about our culture that's the whole theory of the new evil, is because remember, Michael Stone was a personality disorders expert. It's another area of expertise for me. And our whole theory is that personality disorder can be shaped. Personality organization can be shaped by culture. So if the culture is giving a permission structure to let loose a certain way, to take the lid off of Pandora's box, then crazy things can happen. And, there are things that have happened in the past month that are like unspeakable. I mean, they're like, the newspapers are paying attention to a smattering of cases. But for those of us who are really in the reads, I'm aware of cases that are in many ways more shocking. You know, everybody obsessing over Luigi, you know, whatever. I mean, there are cases that are like, dear Lord, how is that being missed? Like the one that I introduced at the beginning.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right. You know, I mean, I'm just saying, like, somehow we pick and choose our stories to pay very careful attention to, and they are stories that say something about our culture. I mean, I don't want to get into the Mangione case, but I mean, I have, as a shrink, been mesmerized at the psychological, cultural phenomenon of that case. Right. I mean, I'm not.
It will be studied.
Well, I think it's what needs to be studied is the people that are sitting around loving it. You know, I mean, that's that phenomenon, that sort of wide scale hyperstophilic fascination is really interesting. And I mean, we could do a whole show on it, but I won't.
That is a whole show. Don't forget.
Yeah.
I think it's a good pathway into a new year.
Oh, you're doing a show on it?
You're going to do a show on it. I don't know half the stuff that you're talking about when it comes to why people fall over these guys.
Yeah. Well, I think that the cultural stuff is really important. There is definitely something sick with the culture. There's no question in my mind. And I think one of the things it has to do with, which is, again, let's not, you know, just to tease what we'll talk about, is it also has a lot to do with the movement since the 1960s in our culture to view everything as sickness. There is a kind of false compassion where you have more sympathy for the mugger than the mugged, as Fulton Sheen put it, right? It's very strange. Now, look, there are people that are ill and commit things, but we're talking about a situation where a person, knowing the difference between right and wrong, thinks it's okay to do something just because they feel like it, right? And, you know, and that has been forgotten. Let's just say, as Fulton Sheen also used to say, sin is a four-letter word. We've forgotten that people are capable of moral depravity. Everything is just sickness? No, it isn't. Right? I mean, you know, and that's why, Chris, you talked about Gethsemane and the cross and all that. I always thought that one of the most fascinating things, because, you know, the good Lord is a good writer. He has a way of doing everything for effect. Gives you something to think about for millennia. And one of the things that I thought was an extremely powerful lesson from the moment of the crucifixion was the two men on the left and right, who represent two choices, right? The choice of, I'm a flawed human being and I made a mistake and I'm sorry. And the choice of, I don't do anything wrong, neither did he, neither did you. Why don't you get us out of here? Give me a jail-free card. And you remember which one, you know.
I know.
Which one, right? So it comes down to that. I am convinced that there's so much symbolism in that moment, right? And then the types of souls that are standing at the foot of the cross, right? The penitent woman, you know, the pure mother, and the contemplative John, right? Tells us those are the kinds of people that wind up at the foot of the cross, right? The contemplatives, the people who are penitent, and the pure people. And, you know, that's what you want. So I think God has a very special closeness with the brokenhearted. I am fond of them for the same reason. I think when people are down in the mud, that's when they're closest.
Yeah.
You know, I'll tell you a story as an interesting way to end this that was told to me by a very great priest. In Catholicism, and you were raised Catholic, I believe, although I don't know, but you've heard a thing or two about saints in your day, right?
I hung out with Gary.
Yeah. Well, very fun. So there was a very, very great saint called Saint Teresa of Avila, who was a mystic, and she was known for the reform of the Carmelite order and everything. And she told a story that this priest told me in passing one day, and it's never left me. And the story is that she got a new habit. You know, the nuns wear the habit. And she, you know, she was very poor, and she took like the little money she had to replace the habit. And she's riding in a wagon in Spain through a terrible storm. And lightning spooked the horse pulling the wagon. And the horse went running, and the wagon turned over, and she went soaring out of the wagon and landed in the mud, and it totally destroyed the new habit, right? And she started yelling at God in the middle of the road. You got to picture this. The horse is running, the wagon's turned over, she's yelling, in Spanish, and she basically says, I've given up everything. I don't own anything. I've dedicated my entire life to you. Like, what are you doing? Like, you couldn't let me have this? And she swore that she heard God answer her. And the answer was, this is how I treat those who love me. And that story is very interesting to contemplate, because what does it mean? What it means is, if God loves you, he's got to pull you close. And there's no way to do that without tugging you out of the world. You have to have the world ripped from you. And when he does that, at first he goes, now this is going to hurt a second. Right? But then in that break, you could be his. And I think that's the point. There's something about the brokenhearted that you could see them, if you had the right eyes, as blessed. Because through that pain, as C.S. Lewis used to say, God speaks to us through a megaphone. And that's the thing I hope the families of these victims think. It's not that God did this. Of course not. But he can use it. He can use it. And I have seen people, criminals, and here's something we should talk about someday, Chris. I've seen criminals have conversions. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen people that were motivated by looking for a father figure or a mother figure that loved them, and then they found God. I've seen people who are addicts who turn their life around that way. I have seen victims who turn themselves into advocates because of it. In other words, it's all about, just like that man on the cross that had the right answer. It's about what you do with it. It's a choice. And you know that, Chris.
Well,
it's a choice.
I have an opinion on that where I always tell my children and my friends, it's better to be trusted by God than to be loved by him.
Oh, that's very clever. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, right. He loves everybody. Doesn't matter who you are, what you are, where you are. And where, the universe is on schedule, but he doesn't trust everybody. And that's where we get good people and bad people, because you violate God's trust, or however people look at it.
Right.
And he withdraws. He'll help you if you come back to him. That one famous picture of the Savior at the door, and the door's missing the handle.
Oh, I love that painting. Yeah, I know.
Right, that painting. And that we forget that door has to be opened from the inside, not from the outside. The Savior doesn't know, but he will pursue you. God will pursue you.
Oh, I know. Like a hat.
He'll never let go. But at the same time, how do you tell a family? I had a woman, not to digress on this great way of going out, but I had an amazing human being. Unfortunately, her son had taken his life. And I put her son in 43 bags after he got hit by a train. He got hit by an Amtrak train. And we were there talking to her. I had to reveal, the problem. And I was sitting there with her, and she looked at me and she goes, "Why would God do this?" And that was her question to me. And I said, "May I ask, why you were feeling that way?" And she said, "Yes." And she said, "You're here." And she was just unwound for obvious reasons. And I said, "May I ask you to maybe have just a shift for a second, a paradigm shift? And please recognize that, the conductor of the train will never be the same, because he spent minutes trying to stop that train. And he witnessed your son's death.
Mm.
I said, would you please look through his eyes this evening as well? That will help you heal. And I've learned that in life. I've learned it through experience, the worst experiences of a family and a parent, as you know, and others know, and the world knows. I've made it clear here on YouTube. But I love your story about the empty chair, Gary, always. It is so true. And there are many out there in this audience maybe listening tonight that we just want you to know, Dr. Brucato, myself, the interview room, our mods, all of us are here together. And this is going forward, always will be a safe place for you. It will always be a safe place for you here on YouTube in a true crime community. We're a little bit different than the other guy, for lack of a better term. We try to come to the table with authenticity in relationship to not only experience, okay, but also a place. If you've ever been a victim, you will teach with authenticity in our chat, and we love that.
Yeah.
We absolutely love it. And so as you go forward into 2025, keep that hope alive, because 25 is going to be a great year. It may not be perfect, right? We may have our challenges, our Gethsemanes, but we are friends, and we need to keep praying for world peace. We need to, set our guns down. We need to set, God does not see in color. So we shouldn't. I mean, I wrote a song called God Doesn't See in Color. Why do we?
I don't know that one. Is that not linked to your YouTube?
No, I haven't recorded it, but I wrote a couple of things, and you can listen to my music if anybody's bored.
Send me that one. I'd like to hear that. But Chris, you touch on an important point, is that when we go out and we're shaking our fist at the world and asking what's wrong with the culture, remember, as John the Baptist put it, before kingdoms change, men must change.
Yeah.
The reality is that what's going on out there is a reflection of what's changing in here. And the only way to put that out, that fire out, is for enough people to change in here, for there to be a wave. And that's what's changing. We're changing in here. And as a consequence, you have a whole nation that feels justified in letting the id out to play. And, that's the way it works. But remember, I referenced the Pandora's box earlier. Remember that in the story of Pandora's box, the part everybody always leaves out of the story is that when Pandora opened the box and all the creatures that represented all the evils of the world came out, there was one that stayed in there when she was sealing it back up, and that was hope.
I know.
Right. So,
Right.
But anyway, on that note, but Chris, I always love to talk to you, and I love that we delve into the philosophical, and I love the victim-centered focus. I think I can't think of a better
And
way.
let's not forget about the people in the Middle East who are fighting. Let's not forget about the fires that destroyed Lahaina in Maui, and many folks in Maui are still struggling. Let's not forget about those who don't have a hot meal tonight. And
That's right.
Let's keep them all in your thoughts, prayers, or however you show the universe your love.
Yeah.
Are you ready? In Hawaii, they say akamai means pay attention, and Christmas is past. As Clark Griswold would say, Mele Kalikimaka, and let's.
Chris, can I just say something before we go? Very quickly, is that, and I've said this elsewhere, I've said it on Josh's show, I challenged the audience, and I said, for Christmas time, Hanukkah time, New Year's, whatever, there are two things I challenge you to do. One, donate to something, the homeless, a drug or alcohol program, a shelter, whatever. give something away like that. And the second is make contact with somebody that you've argued with, shut down the communication with, ignored, forgotten about, because chances are they want to make up too. They miss you. And don't let some stupid grudge, from decades ago keep you from someone that you love. Let your pride go. Do it. And when I said that, I got feedback from people that they did it, and it changed their lives. I had one person write to me and say they talked to a person that they hadn't talked to in like over 10 years. And the person was like, I missed you. I'm so happy you called. In other words, if one person does it, it was worth it. And so please, someone out there, be the one to do those things. And
I'm thinking about doing a New Year's show this evening or this year for those who have no place to go. I want to give them a place to go. Maybe if you're around, what are you doing on New Year's, Gary? You're going to go watch the
I haven't figured it out. It depends, I haven't figured out that I have some people that I may go see, but but I don't know yet. But New Year's is I find very difficult. I'm not a New Year's fan. There are two kinds of people, right? There's people for whom New Year's is a new page, and there's people for whom New Year's is a referendum on the past. And I find New Year's, perhaps I'm too sensitive, but for me, New Year's is very emblematic of all those lost souls out there. And I find it very hard, painful. I try to see it as optimistic. I really do. But there's something about that night with the old lang syne and the people pulling close or whatever, that is hard. Don't you think it's a little sad? You think about the people that aren't there.
Yeah, it's always sad, but
I find it hard.
That's why you work through it.
Why you do it. Exactly. Right. So you kind of put that in a box and you go be with the people that are alive, the people that are here, and instead of concentrating on who isn't. And that's what I do. That's what I try to do. But it is hard. So of course people are commenting that we're not saying anything about the death of Jimmy Carter. Of course, that's a historical event, big deal. For whatever you thought of him, he had a very Christian heart. There's no denying that. The guy had a really Christian heart, right, Chris? I mean, Nobel winner, and good. There's no denying it. Definitely one of those people you would call like a fool for God.
And he grew a lot of peanuts.
So he could
in Georgia.
Say a lot of things about him, but there's no denying he
had a big heart.
He had a big heart. He had his convictions, and he believed what he believed, and he was a man of great faith. There's no question about it. So, anyway.
All right, everybody. We love you. Aloha. Have a good evening.
Hard working every day. I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts. Wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah. Make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away. You and me go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away.